got loyalty, got royalty inside my DNA. I got killer beats, got war and peace inside my DNA. I got poison, pain, and joy inside my DNA.
This channel runs without ads. If you enjoy the content and want to help me stay motivated and make more videos, please consider supporting me through my Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon links in the description. Now let's continue.
Okay. Chapter 1. Princess. A feminine voice called out. Princess. Has anyone seen the princess? A middle-aged brunette called out as she rushed down a long granite corridor. She ran around a corner and bumped into a short man with brown hair. The brunette raised her hands in front of her apologetically. "Oh, I'm so sorry." She apologized quickly. The man waved it away. "It's quite all right, Lady Johanna. Are you in some sort of trouble?" he asked as he brushed himself off. Johanna nodded. "I can't find the princess anywhere, and she needs to meet with her father about her upcoming trip," she replied while playing with the hem of her dress. "The princess?" he asked. Johanna nodded. "I saw her out in the courtyard with your daughter a couple of minutes ago." Johanna sighed in relief. "Thank you so much, Gerard. I'll talk to you later," she called back as she took off down the hall and out of sight. Johanna was gasping for air as she turned a corner and out into the afternoon sun. The courtyard was a large circular flower-filled garden positioned at the base of Castle Hoenn. Johanna gazed across the courtyard in search of the two girls. Her blue eyes stopped moving as she saw the back of a brunette, and brunette's head who were sitting on a bench. "Lady May!" Johanna shouted as she used the last of her energy to get over to the two girls. The two girls turned around and saw the middle-aged brunette running towards them. Getting up from their perch on the bench, they strolled over to greet Johanna. "Good morning, Johanna," the brunette smiled warmly. She wore a long-sleeved elegant white dress that ended at the ankles. Her long brown hair was placed in pigtails that were held in place by white ribbons. "My lad Dash," the brunette raised a hand to politely quiet her. "Johanna, you know you can call me May, you don't need to use the formalities, remember?" May asked politely. Johanna nodded. "I'm sorry, May, but right now you need to go see your father." May frowned. "What does he want? Couldn't it wait till dinner?" she asked curiously. "It's about your trip to Johto. You need to start packing. Most of your clothing are packed, but he needs to talk to you about other matters." "Since when are you going to Johto?" the brunette asked, placing her hands on her hips and facing May. She shrugged. "I don't remember a trip, whe-. Her eyes widened and a look of despair came across her face. "Is it to go see that arrogant son o-? My lady. Watch your tongue, you are part of the royal family and are not to speak such language," Johanna scolded seriously. May sighed. "Sorry, it's just he-. Dawn finished for her, is an arrogant son of a-. Dawn, I will not have my daughter speak like drunken pirate, and yes, the trip is to go see Prince Larousse, so could you please come with me so you can talk to your father?" Johanna spoke irritably, taking the two girls by the wrist and leading them into the castle walls. XXXXXXXXXX. A short walk later, the trio arrived in the throne room. The room was surprisingly inextravagant. The room was only a couple meters wide and a couple meters in length. Opposite of the doors, sat the two thrones, both of which were occupied. A red and gold trimmed carpet led from the door and to the thrones. Against the walls, benches were aligned for scribes, and witnesses for summonses and trials. Johanna led May up to the thrones where a man with navy black hair who wore a large red robe over navy tunic sat. "Hello dear, I believe Johanna informed you of why your mother and I need to speak to you?" the king asked kindly. May nodded. "Is there any possible way that I can get out of this? Drew is so annoying, that I want to throw him out of a third-story window and into a moat," May exclaimed diligently. "I'm sorry, May, I know you find him arrogant, but he really is a nice boy. Isn't that right, Norman?" the queen asked as she glanced to her right where her husband was seated. Norman nodded. "It's true, you've only met with him a couple times, but once you get to know him more you'll start to warm up to the lad. He smiled at his daughter, who in turn gave him a scowl. But Dad, the only reason you want me to like him is because of that stupid agreement you made before I was even born. May shouted angrily. It's for your and the region's own good. May clenched her fists tightly, don't give me that. You only want to do what's best for the region, and if that involves an arranged marriage then that's just fine with you. The throne room was silent. May was furious and her parents were deciding on how they would retaliate. Honey, if you marry Drew then the two regions will be connected. May cut her father off harshly. Which means that trade routes, royalties, armies, and a ton of other stuff will be accessible to Hoenn. All that is fine and well, except that you could care less about your own daughter's happiness. May yelled as tears welled up in her lively blue eyes. Norman opened his mouth to speak, but Caroline gave him a stern look before turning to the princess. May, she began softly, please go see the boy, and who knows, you may end up liking him more than you realize. It has been over a year since you last saw him. May looked her mother in the eye, can Dawn come with me? She asked hopefully. I'm sorry dear, but it's just going to be you going this trip. May closed her eyes in an attempt to cool her anger. What about Evie? Her voice was quiet and Caroline had to strain herself to hear it. Evie has to stay here, the next month will be just you and Drew. May's jaw dropped, a month with Drew. That arrogant, cocky, selfish, womanizing son of a May? Her mother asked curiously. May was staring straight ahead and was silent. Snapping out of her reverie, she began to plead. Please can we make it only a week? Say something came up and I need to be back in a week's time. I won't be able to stand a day with him, let alone a month. She fell to her knees and clasped her hands together, trying to gain a little sympathy from her parents. But she got none. Oh stand up May, you're being ridiculous. Norman scolded. May opened her mouth but he continued, Dawn and Johanna can help you get the rest of your things together and you'll be leaving before dinner. May opened her mouth to reply but was caught off guard when Dawn quickly grabbed her by the arm and ran her out of the room. XXXXXXXXXX. Come on, let's get your stuff together and go see Evie, I'm sure she won't like the news. Dawn said as they began going down a flight of stairs. They continued in silence for a few minutes until they came to a room where two armed guards were stationed outside of the doors. Approaching the door, the guards gave a small bow while simultaneously greeting the two by saying, "My ladies." The two girls nodded and opened the oak door. The room they entered was luxurious. The room had a queen-sized bed laying against the stone walls. The bed was curtained off by a white silk curtain that draped down from the roof. The room also had a table, bench, and a closet that housed a wide assortment of dresses. May walked over to the bed and pulled back the curtain. Curled up on the bed was a small Pokemon with chocolate brown and cream-colored fur. Sitting down she stroked the little Pokemon's fur. Slowly the dozing Pokemon's eyes flickered open and let out a sequel of delight at who was petting it. Evie, Eve. Evie said happily as she jumped up from her sleep and onto May's lap. May giggled, "Hey Evie, it's good to see you two." Evie smiled and liked May on the cheek, which caused her to giggle even more. "Alright May, which dress?" Dawn asked as she held up a blue lace dress that reached the ankles with ruffled sleeves, and a burgundy ruffled sleeve dress that reached the ground. May sighed and stroked Evie's fur. "Why can't I just wear riding breeches and a silk shirt?" she asked solemnly. Dawn sighed, "Because you'll be greeting a prince, and as much as you don't like it, you need to look good." Dawn trailed off as she held the red dress up against May to picture what she would look like with it on. "You'll wear this one, now go change," Dawn ordered as she handed the reluctant princess the dress. May sighed but took the dress and went behind a screen where she began to switch dresses. "So how are things with Paul?" she asked from behind the screen. Dawn blushed a crimson red and played with her dress. "Oh, he's alright, he still is fairly quiet, but I think I'm getting to him." "Are you going to try and get him to ask you to the annual Falling of the Blue Rose Festival?" May questioned curiously, but there was a hint of laughter in her voice. Oh well. Maybe, if he hasn't asked anyone, it's still over a month away so. Dawn replied bashfully as she sat down on the bed. May stepped out from behind the screen and straightened out her dress for Dawn to examine. How's it look? Dawn stood up and tapped her chin with her finger as she circled the princess critically. Perfect. She exclaimed delightedly. May frowned. Well, that's unfortunate, maybe I should wear something that he wouldn't like so he'd leave me alone. Dawn sighed and put an arm around the princess. Forget about him for now, May, you still have an hour before you need to go, so how about we go to the kitchens and get a light snack? May nodded, and opened the door to her room. The two girls and Evie left the room and down the hall. Dawn flickered her gaze to the girl next to her and posed a question, so what about you? She asked curiously. May furrowed her eyebrows in confusion. What about me? Who do you want to go with to the festival? May's shoulders slumped and she pursed her lips. I don't know, knowing Dad he'll probably invite the LaRussas so we can get acquainted, and so that I can spend time with Drew. Dawn shook her head. I can't question the king's take on what he did as the right thing to do, but all I know is that you don't have to marry LaRusse. If you find someone else before the proposal May gagged at the thought of him proposing, but Dawn continued, he would have to call off the arrangement and allow you to be with the person you found. May raised an eyebrow and shook her head. Dad wouldn't allow me to see anyone other than Drew though, and besides, there aren't many boys around the castle that interest me. They're all too flirty and gentlemanly for me. I just want a regular guy. Is that too hard to ask for? Dawn shrugged. There may be no one in the castle, but have you checked around the battle school? Battle school is where the knights and warriors of the region are trained for war and chivalry. Each fiefdom in the region was equipped with a battle school, so that in the time of war, soldiers could travel from fief to fief where they could share and use barracks for resting places. No, I haven't really had the chance to. I don't usually go into the village, so there are no chances for me to visit. XXXXXXXXXX. The two girls turned a corner and entered the kitchen, where a flurry of movement, and a plethora of delicious mouth-watering aromas greeted them. Chefs and apprentices were hurriedly moving from counter to counter preparing the upcoming dinner. A well-rounded man approached the two girls with a friendly smile. Hello there, my ladies, what can I do for you two this fine afternoon? May and Dawn smiled. Good afternoon, William, we were wondering if you could make us a small snack. I'm not going to be here for a month, so one last snack from the best chef in Hoenn would be a great farewell present. William chuckled good-heartedly. You're too kind, Lady May, too kind. What would you and Lady Dawn like to eat? Dawn asked for a slice of apple pie, which William was famous for. While May had another take on what the definition of a light snack was. She requested an entire apple pie and a roast beef sandwich. May had an appetite that was infamous around the Hoenn region. Whenever she traveled, it was a top priority to visit the popular taverns even if her father disapproved of it, and try their best dishes and meals. And not in a very ladylike manner. She had out-eaten grown men, chefs, and soldiers alike. She had yet to come across someone who could best or even come close to out-eating her. The princess and her maid eagerly ate their snack in the grand hall, where a large brick fireplace, and long oak table that could seat well over 30 people were set. Dawn took a small bite of her pie and ummed pleasurably as the smooth texture and taste graced her tongue. This is so good, William has really outdone himself again. May nodded her head in agreement as she finished off the last of her pie. He sure has. He could own a tavern of his own and charge quite the pretty penny for those to dine there. Dawn nodded. So Evie, May has something she needs to tell you. Dawn started, seeing as how they forgot to inform the little fox Pokemon. Evie pet her head to the side and looked at May curiously. Eve? I have to leave for a month, Evie, and sadly you aren't able to come with me this time. May said sadly. Evie's ears drooped down. And looked at May sadly. But Dawn will be here to take care of you, and sooner than you know it I'll be back. Evie's ears perked back up and smiled, hopping onto May's lap, nuzzling her face against the princess. Giggling, May quickly ate her sandwich and stood up, dusting off the crumbs. I guess we should get going or else Dad will be mad that I'm late. Taking Evie into her arms, she and Dawn left the dining room and headed out for the courtyard. XXXXXXXXXXX. After a quick stroll, the two girls arrived at the courtyard and saw a carriage being pulled by a white horse with flames for a mane and a horn on its head. Walking over to the carriage, May stopped outside of the door and turned to Dawn. "Here, you better take Evie," she said, giving the little Pokemon a peck on the cheek and handing her over to the brunette. Dawn took the little fox and quickly bowed towards May. "Your Majesty," she greeted cordially. May spun around and saw her dad, and a young boy around the age of 13 who wore glasses, a green tunic, brown breeches, and a sword sheathed at his side with a smirk on his face. "What's Max doing here?" she asked with a huff, crossing her arms. "He came to say goodbye, isn't that right, Max?" Norman stated, placing a hand on his shoulder. Max nodded. "That's right, and I also get to go with your escort for the first mile or so to see what it's like," he said excitedly. May frowned. "About how many days' travel is it from here to Johto Castle?" "With no rest stops, and traveling hard, it would take possibly 3 days. 5 days with resting," Max stated in a matter-of-factly tone as a glare reflected across his glasses. Before May could reply, a soldier on a Rapidash rode up and began addressing the king. "Your Majesty," he bowed in the saddle. "Good afternoon, Sergeant. Are you and your men ready for the escort travel?" "Yes, Your Majesty, whenever you wish we are ready to go." Norman turned to his daughter. "Well, May, are you ready to go?" May sighed but nodded. "I suppose so. I'll miss you, Dad," she said as she embraced her father into a hug. Norman hugged his daughter and smiled. "You take care now, all right?" he asked as they separated. She nodded and turned to Dawn and Evie. "I'll see you soon, Dawn, okay?" Dawn grinned. "I'll be here for when you get back, and I'll be sure to inform you when you get back on how things are getting along with," she whispered the last part, "Paul." May grinned and took her best friend and made into a hug. Looking down, she scratched Evie behind the ear and smiled. "Are you going to be all right here with Dawn?" Eve nodded happily, giving May a lick on the cheek. May giggled and opened the door to the carriage. "All right, I'll see you all in a month. I'll miss you all," she said as she hopped into the carriage and shut the door. The interior of the carriage was nice, but not very comfortable. The seats were soft, but nowhere near big enough for her to lie down to sleep. If traveling had taught her anything, it would have to be that she should get as much sleep as possible to pass the time quickly. She felt the carriage lurch and then felt the vibration of the wheels moving over the cobble roads as she began her trek towards the Johto region and Prince Larousse. Sighing, she leaned against the side of the carriage wall and repositioned herself so she was comfortable. After a moment she let out a content sigh and slowly shut her eyes and began to drift off into sleep. Soon the only sounds that could be heard were the sounds off the carriage and Rapidash making its way down the road, and the steady deep breathing of the princess. Chapter 2. 3 days. There had been 3 days of hard back-aching travel from Castle Hoenn to Johto Castle. And there were still 2 days of travel left. Princess May Maple had left Castle Hoenn 3 days prior with an armed escort of 10 men to accompany her to Johto Castle in the Johto region. Months before her birth, May had been made a part of an agreement between her father Norman Maple, King of the Hoenn region, and the King of the Johto region, Alexander Larousse. The agreement was that when May was of age, she would be arranged to be married to Drew Larousse, Alexander's son, to unite the two regions which would become the dominating force in the Western world. Now May was less than thrilled about this agreement. The day she met him 10 years ago, he had been nothing but cocky, arrogant, flirtatious, and stuck up. At first she thought he was trying to impress her with his swordsmanship and wealth, but after spending a week with him, she knew it was his real personality. And every visit she paid to the prince, he hadn't changed a bit. And now here she was on her way to spend another unbearable month with him. Saying she was upset about it would be an understatement. XXXXXXXXXXX. May lay against the inner wall of the wooden carriage, dozing peacefully to the sound of the steady beat of the Rapidash's hooves drumming across the dirt path. The ride had been fairly uneventful, after the first kilometer Max had left the escort and returned to the castle, leaving May with no one to talk to. She had spoken to the coachman from time to time, but the conversations were far less than interesting, most of which revolved around what she was going to Johto for, or what she'd been doing around the castle. May snuggled up against the wall to reposition herself. There was something beginning to annoy her, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Deep within her subconscious she could hear the voices of her escort making conversation and the occasional order being shouted. What those orders were though, she couldn't make out. After a few minutes she began to wake up. Whatever was bugging her was starting to irritate her immensely. Stretching her arms in the air, she let out a long yawn and rubbed her eyes. She could hear her escort clearly now, and the sounds of orders being shouted to each other. She paled and felt her heart clench tightly at the voice she heard some distance from the carriage. Get that carriage under control, and move the bodies off the road. A scratchy male voice ordered. There was a chorus of grunting from outside and May began to panic. That's not the escort, something must have happened. May stood up and went over to the small curtained-off window of the carriage. She brought her hand up to move the curtain aside, when the carriage violently lurched sideways, throwing her off of feet and to the other side of the carriage, slamming her head hard against the wall. And onto the floor. May groggily felt where her head had impacted against the wall and got lightheaded when she saw a thin layer of a crimson liquid on her hand. She tried to push herself up, but the strain was too much as a wave of nausea hit, making her fall back onto the wooden floor, falling unconscious. XXXXXXXXXX. A painful pounding sensation ran through the head of the princess. Slowly she stirred as she began to regain consciousness. Her head ached painfully. She went to bring her hands to hold it, but something restricted her. Almost painfully, she peeled open her eyes and took in the blurry surroundings, blinking a couple times to clear the fuzzy image. With her vision clear, she could see it was night with the star-laden sky, and that she was in some sort of camp. There were haggard, sloppily made tents pitched around a small clearing. In the center of the camp lay a large burning fire that lit the entire campsite with a fiery hue. She could smell the smoke of the fire, and what appeared to be some sort of meat being roasted in the air. But the aroma that outdid them all was the heavy lingering smell of alcohol and whiskey. She tried to stand up, but when she felt the tug along her wrists, she turned back and saw her arms bounded together around a tree. Confusion filled the young brunette's eyes as she tried to struggle against the tight rope that held her secured. What happened? She hummed quietly as a small wave of nausea hit her, making her wish she could hold her head. She shut her eyes, trying to will the aching away so she could remember how she ended up there. Piece by piece her fragmented memory slowly returned, why she was no longer at the castle, her trip to Johto, the voices she heard outside of the carriage. The voices. May looked up wide-eyed and gazed quickly around the camp. It seemed empty, but with the fire freshly blazing it was hard to tell. Hurriedly she struggled to loosen the bonds that held her tightly to the tree. Unfortunately the only outcome of her attempt was rope burn around her wrists. She stopped her attempted escape when she heard movement behind one of the tents. Her heart slammed against her chest as she saw a horrid-looking man appear from around it. The man had unkempt dirt-coated black hair, torn brown trousers, and a rolled-up navy long-sleeved shirt under a filthy dark gray tunic. May could smell the thick odor of stale sweat and alcohol surrounding the man as he clumsily and uneasily made his way over to where she sat. She pushed back against the tree as he stopped in front of her. His eyes were a steel gray, his nose looked to have been broken years before as it was positioned at an odd angle, and his thin lips were tilted upwards in a crooked grin. Well, Lour, Majesta. He bowed drunkenly, a small amount whiskey spitting from his slurred words and onto the princess. May winced as the man's breath filled her nostrils. The smell was unbearable. Where am I? Let me go. She ordered, trying to sound forceful and threatening. It didn't really work out. The man broke into a fit of drunken chuckling and bent down so he was right in the girl's face. You are a funny lil' girl, ain't ya? He asked as he patted her roughly on the cheek. Do you know who I am? If you don't let me go you'll be sentenced to death for kidnapping. The man bellowed with laughter, eyes mighty know who you are, Highness, gonna bring us some big money for a ransom the dash. Ulfric. A voice barked angrily from behind. The man turned his gaze from the princess and looked back. "Hello boss, what do you need?" he asked with the crooked grin plastered on his face. "Ulfric, leave the girl alone and get back to your post, damn it. It took us too long to get her, and we lost too many men in the process. So get your sheet together and get back to work," he ordered, angrily grabbing Ulfric by the scruff of his vest and dragging him away. May watched wide-eyed as Ulfric was dragged away and to the other side of the camp, where he began to wander aimlessly deep in the bush. A couple of moments later the man who dragged Ulfric away from her made his way back over towards her. The man wore the same outfit as Ulfric, but instead of the navy shirt, his was white, with a brown vest. He had dark brown hair and a weathered face that showed his age. "He touch you?" he asked gruffly as he spat onto the ground. May shook her head in fright. "Good, you're too valuable, if he had he'd be dead by now." Where am I?" May asked somewhat worriedly. She had no idea how long she'd been unconscious or how far they traveled. "A couple of miles from the border to Johto. We're bringing you back to our camp to send your ransom. Once we get it you can act like none this ever happened," he stated as he turned and began to walk away. "Please let me go," May yelled hoarsely as tears welled up in her lively ocean blue eyes. The boss ignored her and returned to the camp and out of sight behind the tents. In defeat May slumped back against the tree and closed her eyes and began to try and drift off into sleep. She had only tried to fall asleep for what seemed like a minute before her heart almost exploded in fright. Out of nowhere she felt a hand clasp tightly over her mouth and a presence appear over her shoulder. May struggled but stopped when she heard what the person did. "Shoo, don't make a sound. I'm getting you out of here," a male voice whispered into her ear. She was about to look back to see who her supposed rescuer, but stopped when the hand left her mouth and she felt pressure against the ropes that held her wrist. "Don't make a sound, and don't try to run off or they'll hear you," he whispered as he cut through the rope and removed them from her arms. May sighed in relief and brought her hands around in front of her and rubbed softly where the ropes had been. She was amazed that her circulation hadn't been cut off after being tied down for so long. Her thoughts were interrupted by the man appearing from behind the tree and crouching down eye level with her. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. May took in his appearance before answering. The man, or surprisingly young man who appeared to be her age, wore a dark blue fedora-esque hat that spiked off in the back with a blue band around it. A blue tunic was worn over a light gray long-sleeved shirt that had its ends tucked into blue gloves that had yellow stripe running from the cuff up to a light blue circle on the back of the hands. His gray trousers matched his shirt and were also tucked into matching blue boots. "Can you walk?" he asked again after not getting an answer. May snapped out of her reverie and felt a slight tinge of pink come across her cheeks. I think so," she whispered as she shakily stood up. Which proved to be a mistake. After sitting for so long, she hadn't noticed that her legs had fallen asleep. The man in blue caught her before she hit the ground. Carefully he sat her back on the ground and crouched down, turning his back towards her. "Get on." May stared perplexed at him. I can walk, I dash." "Don't argue and get on. The sentry will be making his round past here in a couple of minutes and we need to be long gone by then, so climb on." May was hesitant, but obliged as she wrapped her arms around the boy's neck and was lifted off the ground. Going from a standstill, she was surprised to see the boy take off with surprising speed and maneuverability as he sprinted into the forest, away from the camp and deep into the forest. The forest terrain disappeared as the boy ran through the bush and continued without a loss in stride. May used this opportunity to take a look at the boy's features. His eyes were concealed in the shadow of his hat, but she could see he had raven black hair that was fairly messy, but it worked for him. May looked ahead and saw a slight glow further ahead. She was about to question what it was, but was interrupted by a low-pitched whistle by her blue-hatted hero. The glow started to grow bigger with each step as they drew closer to the object. Within a few seconds they appeared in a very small clearing and in front of a small white pony that had flames for a mane. "A Ponita?" May questioned curiously. The boy stopped beside the saddle fire horse, and gently let May off of his back. His name is Blaze, he stated as he swung up onto the saddle and offered his hand to the princess. May looked at the gloved hand, and gently grabbed it, but was surprised when she was lifted off the ground and up onto the saddle in front of the blue rider. Shouldn't I be riding behind you? She stuttered as a light blush broke out across her face when he took the reins with one hand and placed his other arm around her waist. Can't risk it, if they happen to find us then you'll be safe from arrows or crossbow bolts, and I may need you to take the reins if I need to fight back. Before she could answer he lightly tapped the toe of his boot into the pony's side and they shot off like an arrow from a bow. May turned to look him, she could see from the orange glow emitting from Blaze's mane that the boy had auburn eyes, his face was slightly tanned, but her eyes kept drifting back to his. She could see he was concentrating, but that didn't take out the liveliness and cheerfulness she saw in them. The boy noticing her gaze on him shifted his eyes from ahead and to hers, making her quickly look ahead of her with a slight smile adorning her face. What's your name? May asked curiously. There was a long ride ahead of them and she wanted to know what her rescuer's name was so she could thank him. He didn't answer immediately, but after the pause he did. Call me Strider. May furrowed her eyebrows at the name. That can't be your real name now, right? No, it's not my real name, but call me that for now. You can know my real name once we get you to safety. Why can't you tell me now? She questioned. Because the camp has found out you're missing, and is starting up a search party. He answered as he applied a little pressure to Blaze's side, increasing his pace to a gallop. May turned confused to Strider and gasped when she saw he had his eyes closed and was riding blind. Open your eyes. She shouted in disbelief. He did. Don't shout, we're still not too far away from the camp and I'd not like to give away our position. But you were riding blind, that's so dangerous. She scolded, which earned a smile from Strider. It's alright, we can't crash. Blaze here can maneuver just fine by himself, right Blaze? He asked. There was a snort in response from the fire type which made Strider's smile widen. May couldn't help the small smile that formed on her lips at that. It wasn't very often when a rider and Ponyta or Rapidash talked to each other and received a reply in return. How do you know that they found that I was gone? Strider slowed Blaze to a canter as they neared the edge of the forest and entered the windswept plains in front of them. I could see them. He stated flatly. How could you possibly see them? May asked, confused, and disbelievingly calling his bluff. Aura. Aura? May questioned. Yes, aura. To use aura you have to be dash. She stopped as she realized what she was saying. Turning back to see Strider, she looked into his eyes. Are you a guardian? She asked in disbelief. Not quite, my lady, I'm still an apprentice. He replied. She opened her mouth to reply but was cut off when he continued, Your Highness, I know you probably have plenty of questions, but may I suggest trying to get some rest? We're almost at my campsite so we can get you patched up and ready to take the road tomorrow morning. May saw the honesty in his eyes, and slowly nodded. Okay, wake me when we get to your camp. Then with a smile she added, and if you let me fall off of Blaze here, I'll have you brought in for treason. She joked. She heard a snort behind her and looked back to see Strider with a grin on his face and a raised eyebrow looking at her. I wouldn't dream of it, my lady. Blaze has a soft spot for princesses and would probably pick you up and leave me behind. May was about to reply when Blaze snorted and nodded his head in agreement, which May burst into giggles at. Once the giggling subsided, she leaned back into Strider's hold and closed her eyes, with a small smile still on her lips as she drifted off into sleep. XXXXXXXXXXX. May felt a gentle nudge on her shoulder and shrugged it away, trying to fall back into her slumber. She frowned when she was nudged a little harder, then given a little bit of a shake. Slowly she opened her eyes and gaped when she saw she had her face inches away from Strider's. You awake? He asked quietly, ping his head to the side. May nodded, which brought a smile come across Strider's face as he elegantly swung down from the saddle and offered his hand to her. May took the offered hand, and slid off the saddle and onto the ground. Using this time to take in her surroundings, they were in a small clearing that had a small tent pitched off to one side and a log that was beside a blackened fire pit that looked to have been used recently. "How'd you sleep?" Strider asked as he went around to Blaze's saddlebag and removed a scabbard that housed a long-bladed sword. May went around to where Strider was clipping the scabbard to his side and answered, "Pretty well. How far away are we from those bandits?" she asked nervously, looking over her shoulder. Strider pursed his lips. "We rode for a few hours, and our camp is a few kilometers west of theirs, so we'll be safe for the night," he answered. "Then why do you have a sword with you?" He nodded. "I'm keeping watch. We're heading out in a few hours, so once we get you patched up you need to get some more sleep." For the first time that night May remembered seeing the blood that had been on her hand when she was knocked unconscious in the carriage. "How did you know I was kidnapped?" He gestured to the log by the fire pit as he went back to looking through the saddlebag. "I was on my way back from a courier mission when I rode past a spot on the road that had blood splattered around the ground." He took out a small package from the saddlebag and joined May on the log. "I knew something was up because there were no bones, or carcasses lying around from a wild Pokemon attack. So I scanned the area with Aura and picked up a strange feeling." He trailed off as he opened the small package and removed a cloth, a canteen, and a small vial of clear liquid. Some 200 meters from the road was a carriage and he looked her in the eye. "The bodies of your escort." May looked down at the ground as she felt her heart go heavy for the men who gave their lives to try and protect her from harm. "When I saw the bodies, I knew by their armor that they were from the castle." So May looked up and gazed at him curiously. You live at the castle?" she questioned. He shook his head. "I live just outside of Petalburg with Alyssa. I rarely visit the castle, I only go when Alyssa is summoned or—" "Well, that's it," he answered. "You're apprenticed to Alyssa Cloud?" May asked in genuine surprise. Strider grinned. "Apprenticed and raised, but we can talk about that later," he said, waving his hand dismissively as they got off topic. "Anyways, I checked the carriage and seeing that it was empty, I took it that this was some sort of hostage ransom sort of deal. Then I went around back to where your clothing was stored and opened a few trunks and You looked through my clothes?" she asked incredulously. A dumbfounded grin came across Strider's face at her reaction. Before he answered, he opened the canteen and wet down the cloth before turning to the princess. "This may sting," he stated as he gently brought the wet cloth across the small gash above her left eyebrow and began to clean the dried blood away. May watched as he gently went to work on her wound. The water had stung at first, but that quickly went away and the gentle touch of Strider. After a moment he examined the small cut and took the vial and dripped a small amount of the liquid onto a dry portion of the cloth. "This will sting, but it will stop any possible infection, and any possible headaches." With that he gently brought the cloth back up to her wound and gently ran it across the cut. And he was right, it did sting. May kept herself from making a sound by biting her bottom lip to focus on the pain in her lip instead of the cut. Finally Strider replaced the cloth, canteen, and vial back into the package and sat in on the ground next to the log. "So when I saw the expensive clothing, then the royal seal on one of the locks, I knew that either you or your mother had been taken. Which reminds me," he stood up and went over to the saddlebag and removed a pair of riding breeches, a white silk shirt, and a blue tunic that was identical to his own. Taking the 3 items, he handed them to the princess. "I figured that whoever was in the carriage would be wearing a dress, so I grabbed a shirt and a pair of pants because, well, that dress will be a pain to ride in." May raised an eyebrow at him, but silently thanked him. "And the tunic?" she asked. He shrugged. "You don't have to wear it, but it'll keep you warm during the night, and I was in a hurry so I forgot to grab you a vest," he replied sheepishly, rubbing the back of his neck. May smiled and stood up. "Thanks, I'm going to go change." She began to walk off towards a group of bushes when she stopped and turned back to face him. "And don't even think about peeking." Strider laughed and bowed. "I wouldn't even think of it, Your Highness." May smiled and headed towards the bushes where she changed in privacy. While changing she began to think about the past 24 hours. She had been kidnapped, had lost her escort in an ambush, and was now traveling with an apprentice or a guardian. And she had to admit, she was enjoying it a lot more than she would like to admit. Losing her escort left her feeling guilty. And she would feel awful for admitting it, but she was sort of glad that the ambush had taken place. It delayed her from continuing her visit to Drew, and she was now traveling with the mysterious Strider, which wasn't all that bad. May placed the tunic over her head and realized she didn't have a belt to hold it down. Stepping out from behind the bushes and back into the clearing, she saw Strider shrugging a full quiver onto his back and attaching a long bow to the side of Blaze's saddle, which was now on the ground beside the grazing pony. "Strider?" she asked to get his attention. He turned around and smiled at her. "Yes, my lady. Do you have a belt or something I could use to hold down the tunic?" He nodded and went over to the saddle bag where he removed a brown leather belt and walked over to the young princess, handing it over to her. "Thanks," she smiled as she took the leather belt and wrapped it around her waist before pulling it tight. Once it was secured, she looked up and saw Strider giving her a quizzical look. "What, do I not look nice?" she asked, puzzled. He shook his head. "Oh no, you look great." She looked down as she blushed a light crimson red at the compliment as he continued, "It's just where were you headed?" he asked curiously. "What do you mean? Where were you traveling to? You had a full escort and are pretty far from the castle, so." A look of understanding and displeasure came across her face. "Oh. Well, I was on my way to Johto Castle to see the prince." "And I take it now that you know that's where we'll be going," she guessed, knowing the answer. He didn't answer right away. He took off his hat and placed it on the log. Before speaking, "Well, personally I think it would be best to bring you back to the king to inform him of what happened. But if you really want to, we could bring you to Johto. It's your decision really," he informed her. May gaped. She couldn't believe her luck. She wouldn't have to go to Johto and see Drew, she could go home. With no understanding why, she rushed forward and tackled Strider to the ground into a massive hug. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she exclaimed in delight. Strider stared in confusion at the unladylike actions of the princess. Coughing apologetically to get her attention, he spoke, My lady." May looked into his eyes, and realized what she had done. Blushing furiously, she quickly got off of him and mumbled a sorry before looking away from him to hide her embarrassment. Strider stood up and dusted himself off and looked at the embarrassed princess. "Sue. You want to go to Johto then?" he guessed at her reaction. May spun around, forgetting the previous event, and shook her head madly. "No, no, no, please take me back to the castle. I can't stand the prince, he's such a. She couldn't find the word to describe him. "And but?" Strider guessed. Seeing the princess's reaction, he knew he guessed right. "Yeah, how'd you know? Have you met him?" May asked curiously. Strider nodded his head, and walked over to Blaze. "Only once, it was a few years ago. He called Blaze the runt of the foals, told me they were going to do away with him and give me an actually good specimen. I wouldn't have been one to take that, but having Alyssa there kept me doing something that I may have regretted." May watched as he stroked Blaze during the retelling of his meeting with LaRousse. May came up beside him and pet Blaze's mane, which made him shake his head happily. When he did that, she saw the small smile come across Strider's face. "What's your name?" she asked softly. He sighed. "Best I don't tell you until we reach Petalburg," he replied simply. "How come?" "To be honest, my lady, we're going to be traveling hard for the next few days until we reach at least the Rustboro Strait. And come morning, if we run into those bandits, and if they hear my name, it could make me a target in the future. So I'll keep calling you Strider," she persisted. He sighed. "You're not gonna stop asking until I tell you, right?" She nodded. "Well." He looked her in the eye and she gave him a pout which made him chuckle quietly. "All right." May grinned and nudged him with her elbow for him to tell her, "So. My name is Ash." "Ash?" "Yes, Ash." May nodded as she thought over his name. "Ash?" she asked. "Yes." "What's your last name?" "Ketchum." "Ash Ketchum?" A grin had begun to form on Ash's face as the three-word conversation progressed. Yes, my name is Ash Ketchum. Where are you from? She asked to see how much she could get out of him. I believe I'm originally from Kanto, he answered. This caught May's attention. Why are you in Hoenn if you were born in Kanto? He shrugged. My lad dash, May cut him off. You can call me May, Ash. We are friends after all, right? Ash didn't expect to hear that. Slightly flabbergasted, he nodded his head. Right, we're friends, May, he replied. So why are you in Hoenn? Well, May. I'm not really sure. As far back as I can remember, I was raised by Alyssa, and well, that's about it, he answered truthfully. Boo dash, Ash cut her off. May? He asked politely. Yeah. Go to sleep, we've got a long day ahead of us tomorrow and you'll be able to ask whatever you want then, okay? What about you? I'm keeping watch, and I'll wake you when it's time to leave, he replied as he went over and sat down on the log. May frowned. You should sleep, I've slept enough today anyways, so you dash. Ash held up a hand to politely cut her off. That's alright, May, take the tent and get a few hours of sleep. And before you argue back, I'll let you take the reins tomorrow and I'll get some sleep then, okay? He offered. She pursed her lips as she thought of his offer. Slowly she nodded and a smile came to her lips. All right, that's a deal, she stated as she went over to the low-pitched tent and crawled in. It wasn't the most comfortable sleeping arrangement. In fact, she'd rather be sleeping in the saddle again by Ash. As soon as the thought came into her mind, she quickly shook it off. She had just met him, and the truth was she wouldn't see him very often. It was like he said, it was very rare for him to visit the castle, and besides she still had the arrangement her father made still intact. Sighing, she shut her eyes and drifted off to sleep, listening to the soft chatting between Ash and the occasional snort by Blaze. After a few minutes, she was back asleep, with a long few days ahead of her. And a few mixed feelings as well. Chapter 3. May? A voice asked uncertainly. The princess stirred in her sleep, covering her ears with her hands trying to ignore the sound. After a few moments of idle silence, she smiled gratefully when there seemed to be more attempted tries at her being awoken. However, the smile was quickly wiped off of her face, when she felt a pair of hands grasp her ankles and pull her out from the tent. What are you doing? She shrieked incredulously, as she saw the face of who had disrupted her sleep. We need to get going, Ash stated bluntly as he bent down and picked the princess up bridal style. May blushed uncontrollably. What are you doing? She stuttered again as Ash carried her over to the saddled Blaze and hefted her up to the reins. I wasn't sure if you were going to put up a fight. Believe it or not, I've never seen someone sleep as peacefully as you did in one of those tents before. And you may be still tired and want to continue sleeping, so I carried you to the saddle. Well, I'm awake now, and I've got to say, you really don't treat me like a princess, do you? May giggled as Ash swung up behind her and taking the reins. What about the tent? Ash looked back at the small tent and shrugged. Well, I would bring the tent, but that would just be added weight for Blaze to carry. And with you and I riding, that'd be more than he could handle. There was a snort of disagreement by Blaze, who seemed to think otherwise. As for the other part, I'm pretty sure I've been treating you like a princess, he corrected as he gently tapped Blaze's side with the toe of his boot, which let them begin their long journey back to Castle Hoenn. May looked back at Ash and smirked. Oh yes, literally dragging a princess out of bed is quite the gentlemanly act, she said sarcastically. Not only that, but I did carry you and place you onto Blaze. So yes, I do believe I am quite gentlemanly as you put it. He grinned down at her as he placed the reins into her hands. May looked down and saw the leather reins being placed into her hands. Looking back to Ash, she smiled. So I take it my big hero wants to take a nap? She teased playfully. Ash nodded. If you don't mind. Of course not, it was part of our deal. Which reminds me, I've still got some questions to ask you if you don't mind me asking. Ash wrapped both his arms around the princess's waist and lay his head gently against her back, which made her cheeks tint a delicate pink, and a soft smile grace her lips. I'll answer your questions when I wake up, and if by any means you feel uncomfortable, nervous, or feel the slightest bit off, wake me up right away, okay? Ash asked seriously, closing his eyes. He felt May nod. All right, have a nice sleep, she said softly, taking a quick glance behind her to see the soon-to-be resting figure. XXXXXXXXXXX. It was a couple of hours later, and May had begun to get restless. They had been following the main road at a little less than a canter. The sun was now up, blazing down upon them in a cloudless blue sky. May sighed and looked around the road. They were traveling down a dirt path surrounded by what could be miles upon miles of flat lands. The grass was short, and swaying gently in the small breeze that drifted in the air. "So Blaze, what's it like working with Ash?" she asked in hopes of some sort of conversation. Blaze snorted and shook his head in response. "That good, eh?" Blaze nodded, and the two fell back into silence, except for the muffled hoof beats on the dirt floor. May looked over her shoulder when she heard a long yawn. "How long did I sleep for?" Ash mumbled as he removed his arms from May's waist and stretched them in the air. A slight frown creased her mouth with the removal of his arms, but she answered. "Probably about 4 or 5 hours, it's been quite, and that's about it." Ash nodded and shut his eyes, concentrating on the invisible. "Seems clear. Nothing that I can see anyways. So can I ask you some questions?" May asked hopefully. She felt one arm go around her waist and the other gently remove the reins from her hand. "Sure, but we'll take a short break in about an hour or so to have a quick lunch," he answered as he applied pressure to Blaze's side and increased their pace to a gallop. "Sounds good to me. What type of lunch are we going to have?" Her curiosity aroused at the thought of a hot meal. "Dried meat and stale bread," he replied downheartedly. "Oh." May wasn't sure how to respond to that. Her hopes of something filling diminished. The life of a soldier, nothing but hard rations and bad-tasting meals, Ash informed the princess. May turned and faced him. "It can't be all that bad. What about when you're not on a mission or something?" She felt him shrug. "Well, home-cooked meals, and on occasion Alyssa and I will head to the tavern in town, nothing really fancy." May nodded her understanding. "How long have you been apprenticed to Lady Cloud?" She heard the Aura Guardian unsuccessfully cover a snicker of laughter by coughing, but he answered, "Well, I suppose you could say my entire life since she raised me. But if you want to talk the actual apprenticeship, I think it'll be almost 5 years in 3 or so months." He trailed off as he thought about his answer and if it was correct. "Wow, so you'll be graduating soon then?" May asked, genuinely surprised. There was a pause before he answered, "Well, sort of." He answered uneasily. May could hear and sense the uneasiness in his voice and pressed the question further. "What do you mean sort of?" "Well, I'm..." He trailed off as he thought of the right way to phrase what he was thinking. "I'm graduating. But I'm not changing fiefs," he finished finally. May raised an eyebrow in surprise. "How come? Lady Cloud is already assigned to the castle and surrounding villages, so how come you're not being transferred to a fief that could use a guardian?" "Well, remember how I told you I was originally from Kanto?" Ash asked. The princess nodded. "Well, that's the reason. Don't ask me why, because I don't know myself. But for whatever reason the council wants me staying with Alyssa. I really don't know." "Have you ever asked her why?" "I've asked her 3 times, and all 3 times I got the same answer." "And what's that?" she asked curiously. There was apparently a lot more to Ash than she thought. He was mysterious, friendly, she didn't know him all that well, but she knew she could trust him, fun to be around, funny, handsome. As soon as she thought the final thought she shook it away. She couldn't be thinking things like that. She kept saying she'll tell me when I'm older, or when the council sees fit to. May pursed her lips. She could hear in his voice that he was telling the truth, but still the answer was fairly odd. "Do you know when we'll be back at the castle? Not that I'm not enjoying spending time with you or anything, it's just I don't like the fact that we could be being followed at this very moment." "I understand, and I don't hate spending time with you either. And to answer your question, if we skip stopping to sleep at night we could make it to the castle in say a day and a half, it would mean being sore for few days afterwards, but we'd be there sooner." May smiled. what do you do when you're not on missions? Do you go visit friends or anything? I usually spend my time training, but most of the time I spend with Alyssa and a few friends, nothing really. How about you? Being a part of the royal family must be interesting, right? Ash asked curiously. May shrugged, I suppose so. I spend time with my maid and best friend Dawn. We travel every so often. I play with my Eevee a lot. She's got surprising energy for being so small. I really don't do all that much, she replied truthfully. After a moment of no reply, she felt the hand that was around her waist removed and a burst of speed come from Blaze, galloping into a full sprint. Ashwa dash, she turned around to see what he was doing, but stopped when she was forced to hunch low over Blaze's back by Ash, which increased Blaze's speed greatly. May twisted her head and saw Ash's eyes shut closed. Ash, what are you doing? She asked hesitantly. May flinched in fright as Ash's eyes snapped open, as he reached to where his bow was stored next to the saddle bag, spinning around in the saddle, knocking an arrow onto the string, and pulling back until the bow was at full draw. Ash? She asked again nervously. She was about to sit up, but Ash's voice stopped her. Stay down, and keep Blaze going straight, he ordered firmly. May knew by the tone in his voice that this was no joking matter. Something was out there and they were about to run into trouble. She took the reins into her hands and grasped them tightly so that the whites of her knuckles were showing. They rode in silence, without any interruption. A minute passed and May was beginning to think that Ash was seeing things. Ash, are you Sir Dash? Ash cut her off quietly. Listen carefully, he stated. Ash nudged Blaze with the toe of his boot, which made Blaze hesitate for a split second in his stride. But for that brief pause, a faint rumbling could be heard. What is it? May whispered, looking around the open plains for some sort of movement. Her answer came from the deep thrum of the longbow, which released an arrow at a high angle into the sky. May was about to ask why Ash had shot at nothing, but a cry of pain was heard off in the distance. Then it all happened in a flash. Seemingly appearing out of the ground, 10 disheveled riders appeared galloping towards them, with swords and crossbows waving in the air. Ash reached back into his quiver, removed a black-edged arrow and knocked it, bringing it back to full draw in a heartbeat. He released the arrow, which cut through the air and buried itself deep within the chest of one of the bandits with a meaty smack, dropping him from the saddle. May's heart pounded furiously in her chest as Ash dispatched 2 more riders. She was about to look back when she felt Ash quickly cover her left side, followed by a pained grunt from beside her. Looking back, she could see a crossbow bolt buried deep in Ash's shoulder. She looked from the bolt and to his eyes, and saw him looking at the reins. Get closer to them, Ash shouted, as he reached for the bolt that was lodged in his shoulder and tore it out. The princess obliged and applied light pressure to the left side of the reins, which began moving them closer to the pursuing bandits. Painfully, Ash knocked another arrow and aimed it at the rider who was leading the pack. Releasing, the arrow didn't take the bandit, but instead the filthy Rapidash he was riding. The arrow took the fire horse in the kneecap, shattering the bone and causing both rider and Pokemon to crash into the ground in a dusty heap. The Aura Guardian quickly replaced his bow and unsheathed his sword. The intended result from taking out the lead rider was that the followers would stumble over the body of the Pokemon, causing a chain reaction of similar incidences. And luckily for Ash, that's exactly what happened. Removing the reins from the princess's hands, Ash pulled back on the reins, causing Blaze to brace his legs, skidding 180 degrees around to face the fallen bandits. Keep your distance, and Blaze stay alert, Ash ordered as he dug his toe into Blaze's side, which sent them taking off towards the regrouping bandits. May was about to frantically protest, when she felt the reins begin handed back to her and Ash's legs move away from hers. Spinning around, she saw him crouched on the back of Blaze, getting ready to leap off into battle. Ash, don't! May cried, but it was too late. Ash leapt off of Blaze as they passed the fallen bandits and rolled into a fighting stance with his sword at the ready. The princess applied pressure to the reins to turn around, but Blaze refused to turn back, but instead kept a fair distance away from the fighting. XXXXXXXXXX. Ash leapt off of Blaze and rolled to break his fall. He heard the princess shout something, but ignored it for the time being. Twirling the sword once in his hand, he took a look at his attackers. There were 2 men lying unmoving at odd angles underneath of the fallen Rapidash, which had snapped its neck during the fall. But there were still 4 armed men, all but one armed with a short sword, while the odd man out was equipped with a crossbow. "Get 'em, boys!" The crossbowman shouted, aiming towards Ash. The 3 swordsmen ran towards Ash, who was ready on the ball of his feet. The first swordsman swung an overhand cut which Ash parried easily, before turning to block a side slide being swung by another. Blocking another side cut, Ash lunged forward and took a bandit in the abdomen, causing him to crumple to the ground in a heap. Spinning back to face the remaining swordsman, he ducked just before a quiet twang sound cut through the air. The crossbow bolt flew over Ash's head and into another swordsman. Using this time to his advantage, he parried a side cut, followed by delivering his own sideways cut to the final swordsman head, but in the final split second before contact he twisted his wrist and hit him with the flat of the blade in the temple, knocking him unconscious. There was a moment of silence before the sound of hoof beats brought Ash to his senses. Spinning around, he saw the bandit with the crossbow making a getaway on one of the uninjured Rapidashes. Ash watched the retreating figure before placing 2 fingers into his mouth and letting out an ear-piercing whistle. XXXXXXXXXX. The princess watched nervously as Ash clashed with the bandits. She saw the bandit who was furthest away from him run towards a Rapidash and climb into the saddle before galloping away from the fight. Her attention was turned away from the bandit when she heard a high-pitched sound coming from the now lone standing figure at the battle scene. Without warning, Blaze took off in a trot over to where the blue-hatted guardian stood over the fallen bandits. Blaze pulled up alongside Ash and nickered a greeting, who in return pet the tired pony. "Thanks for taking care of the princess, Blaze, I owe you one," Ash smiled as he went around to the saddlebag and pulled out a cloth and a short coil of rope. May slid down from the saddle and marched over to Ash angrily. Ash turned from cleaning the blood off of his sword to the princess, who was glaring at him angrily. "Are you insane?" She yelled incredulously. She was shaking terribly, whether it was from the adrenaline rush, or being scared he couldn't tell. Ash blinked twice before resheathing his sword. I don't think so." He joked as he went over to the unconscious bandit and began tying his arms and legs behind his back. May fumed angrily. "You don't just jump off of a horse and start fighting them without warning me first. You could have been killed." Ash finished tying the bandit secure and stood up to face the princess. "May, it's all right. I'm okay and you're fine. There's no need to be ow." He winced as she smacked him on the shoulder. May gasped as she remembered he'd been hit by the crossbow. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot that you got hit by the dash." Ash cut her off by raising his hand. "It's all right, there's no need to apologize. Are you all right though?" he asked softly. May nodded frantically. "Yeah, it's just my adrenaline is going and I'm not used to all this type of thing. And you could have been killed." And dash, she stopped her rambling as Ash took her into a gentle hug. "Just take it easy," he whispered softly, "you're in shock right now." May closed her eyes and put her arms around him and held him tightly. She was scared and she wasn't afraid to admit it. Never in her life had so much happened in such little time. "Thank you," she whispered as she looked up to her guardian. "You don't need to thank me, let's get this guy." He jerked his head at the unconscious bandit, and secure him onto one of the uninjured Rapidashes. With that, Ash gently broke the hug and made sure the princess would be all right. Making sure that May was indeed all right, he walked over to the unconscious bandit and dragged him over towards a now grazing Rapidash. Ash stroked the Rapidash's mane to show that he would do it no harm. After a moment he figured the evolved version of Blaze wouldn't try anything, and painfully hefted the bandit up onto the saddle. The limp body had his legs tangling on one side of the horse's body, while his arms and head drooped on the other. Taking the Rapidash's reins, he led it over to where the brunette was waiting patiently. "Are you ready to go?" Ash asked softly. He knew that the princess was still scared, and he'd take as long as she wanted to before they headed out again. May shakily nodded and watched as Ash tied the Rapidash's reins to Blaze's saddle's pommel. He then went over to the princess and helped her up into the saddle, before he swung up behind her. About to nudge Blaze to continue their journey, the princess's voice stopped him. Ash? She asked. Yeah, May. She turned to look at him. Would it be alright if you rode in front this time? She asked hopefully. Ash could see in her eyes that she still needs comfort over what just happened, and he nodded. Sure. With that he slid off the saddle and waited for the princess to reposition herself so that Ash could fit in front of her. Climbing back into the saddle, he felt the brunette's arms wrapped tightly around his waist, and her head laying against his back. Ready to go? He asked softly. He felt her nod, so he applied gentle pressure to Blaze's side and they took off back towards the dirt trail that led towards Castle Hoenn. XXXXXXXXXX. The two rode at a steady pace for the next couple of hours. The previous blazing sun was hidden behind the horizon, lighting the sky with a light orange glow. Ash looked down at his loyal pony and yawned. Hey Blaze, how are you doing? Do you want to take a rest? He asked. Blaze tossed his head in response and moved off to the side of the road, and behind a mound of rocks. Ash looked over his shoulder and saw the sleeping princess. After the run-in with the bandits, May had gone right to sleep. She wasn't used to seeing people risk their lives, or actually fight to the death. Being at the castle kept her locked away from harsh reality that not everything is going to turn out right, that having an escort is going to keep the bad guys away. Ash knew that even though what she had witnessed wasn't all that bad, it was still enough to give you nightmares. He experienced them on more than one occasion, and he wouldn't be surprised if it eventually happened to the princess herself. May. He whispered, to try and wake the sleeping girl. May. There was a slight stirring from the girl, but still no luck. Sighing, Ash gently removed her hands from around his waist and quickly slipped down from the saddle. Blaze, can you kneel down so I can get the princess off you and take that saddle off? Ash asked quietly. Blaze whined quietly in response and went down on his knees. For the second time that day, Ash picked the princess up bridal style, and brought her over to the rocks and gently laid her against them. The next few minutes were followed by Ash removing the saddle from Blaze's back and allowing him graze freely. Opening up the saddle bag, he searched around until he came across his small medical kit. Lifting the lid, he removed a clean cloth, his canteen, and a sewing needle and thread. Placing the items neatly in a pile on top of the bag, Ash removed his hat, followed by his tunic, gloves, and shirt. He glanced at his shoulder and examined the wound he sustained from the crossbow bolt. Should have dealt with this sooner. He thought as he saw the large amount of dried blood that ran down the length of his arm. Taking the canteen and cloth, he began to clean the crimson blood off of his arm, and around the wound. Once it was cleaned, he looked at the sewing needle and thread. Should I sew it up? I could just heal it right now, but it could go wrong, and Alyssa isn't here to bail me out this time if I mess up. As Ash was internally debating on how he was going to deal with his shoulder, he hadn't noticed that May had been watching him since he had begun undressing. There had been quite the noticeable blush on her cheeks as she first took in his body. His arms were finely toned and his chest supported a chiseled six-pack. May wasn't one to ogle, but seeing the young man who had rescued her like this gave her a slightly odd feeling in her chest. Am I Ash? She asked almost shyly. Ash snapped out of his internal debate and turned to the brunette. Smiling he asked, how'd you sleep? All right, thanks. Well, what are you doing? She asked, gesturing to his topless body. Ash looked at himself and motioned to his shoulder. I need to patch up my arm before it gets infected. Probably should have done it right away, but I wanted to make sure you were feeling all right. How are you feeling, by the way? May stood up and stretched her arms in the air, yawning. I feel a lot better. She walked over to him and examined the wound. You shouldn't have left that untouched because of me though. Ash smiled and waved it away. I'd rather know that you were safe and feeling fine than having to deal with an easy fix like this. May smiled and a light pink tinted her cheeks at his words. He barely knew her, but here he was, telling her that he'd put herself before he even thought about himself. Do you need help? She asked as she tenderly felt lips of the wound. Ash wasn't sure why, but a slight warmth spread through his cheeks at her gentle touch. Do you know how to sew? She nodded. One of the things you learn as a princess. It's not very exciting, but it can come in handy I suppose, she answered as she took the needle and thread from off of the saddle bag and motioned for Ash to sit on the ground. Ash did as told and watched as she knelt down next to him and began to gingerly stitch the small wound. So what do you want to do after this? Should we set up camp for the night, or should we keep going? Ash asked curiously. May tied off the stitch and looked around for something to cut the excess thread away. Ash reached to his side and pulled out a small dagger and handed it to the brunette, who carefully cut through the thread and gently patted her handiwork. How long until we reach the castle? She asked curiously as they both stood up and dusted themselves off. If we camp out for the night, we'd reach the castle by say early the day after tomorrow, but if we leave now we can get there tomorrow night. It's your choice, Ash replied as he pulled his shirt over his head followed by his tunic. May pursed her lips. She really wasn't all that tired, and would love to get back home to avoid any more trouble. But she'd love to spend more time with Ash. There was just something about him that interested her. Would it be alright if we continued on? I really don't want to have to see any more fighting, she admitted. Ash nodded his understanding. I understand, and it's best that we get him. He tilted his head in the direction of the still unconscious bandit, to the castle for questioning. May had forgotten about the captured bandit and looked over to where the rapid Ash carried him. The man looked familiar, but she couldn't quite remember why. Shrugging the thought away, she brought her attention back to Ash, who had resaddled Blaze and had just tied the Rapidash's reins back onto the pommel of Blaze's saddle. Ready to go? Ash asked as he swung up onto the saddle and offered his gloved hand down to her. May nodded and took the offered hand and was pulled up in front of the Aura Guardian. She unsuccessfully tried to hide the small smile that once again made its way upon her lips as he placed an arm around her waist. Gently nudging Blaze with his toe, the two once again began the final leg of their journey to Castle Hoenn. Chapter 4. Please sir. Please, we meant you no harm. No. Please, I swear you'll never see me again. No, now be quiet. The Aura Guardian snapped irritably. The Guardian and Princess been following the main trail that lead to Castle Hoenn for 32 hours straight, with rest stops every 4 hours to rest Blaze and to eat a light meal. Unfortunately, a few hours after the two set out, their prisoner had woken up and had begun babbling since. But sir, it was a harmless prank dash. Ash snapped his head to the bandit with his eyes blazing in annoyance. A harmless prank? He asked incredulously. Yes sir, a harmless prank, never meant to hurt anyone. The bandit agreed, nodding his head furiously. Ash looked dumbfounded up to the sky in exasperation. Me slitting your throat would be considered harmless prank to then, I suppose, huh? Or me dragging you on the ground behind us is a harmless prank. The bandit went wide-eyed. You wouldn't really do that, would you now sir, would you? I mean, we're practically friends now, right? He asked, horrified by the idea. Ash turned his gaze from the babbling bandit to the princess when he heard the tiniest giggle escape her lips. May, how can you possibly find this funny? He's asking to be set free and he thinks we're friends. Ash asked incredulously to the grinning princess. Well, you two do seem pretty close, Strider. I could see you both as best friends, she giggled in amusement. The past few hours had been filled with constant bickering back and forth between Ash and the still unnamed bandit. At first May had found him rather annoying, since the man had given her a migraine. But a couple hours afterwards the constant banter between the two males had amused her throughout the entire trip. The bandit gasped. You hear that, sir? He asked in astonishment. Best friends, Her Highness said it herself, best friends. You can let me go since I'm trustworthy and all, since we are best friends. The final two words he whispered as close to Ash's ear as possible. The brunette burst into a fit of uncontrollable laughter as she felt the Aura Guardian shudder behind her as the bandit's whiskey-thick breath traveled to his nose. We are not friends. We are not best friends. We are, however, enemies. Ash stated as he rubbed his temples with his hand. No. The bandit gasped. We can't be enemies. We're friends, best friends. Right, my lady, you would say sir and I are best friends, right? He asked hurriedly. The princess gave an unladylike snort and answered, well. She cleared her throat to stifle the laughter, you are both enemies. The bandit drew in a sharp breath as if he were about to expect the death penalty, but who's to say you can't be friends? And enemies? May could feel the glare that ash was burning into her back. But how? He asked. May couldn't help the large grin that spread across her face at his tone. It sounded as if this was the most important fact that he would ever hear in his life. You could be. She snorted, barely unable to contain the laughter that was about to escape her. Frenemies. Do you hate me? Ash whispered into her ear, which sent chills down her already shaking body. Frenemies. Hear that, sir? We're best frenemies. You can let me go now because I mean you and your lady no harm. He exclaimed as if everything was completely settled. Ash let out an overly dramatic sigh. Well, it isn't us who gets to decide if we're friends. Ash informed the bandit in a firm but matter-of-factly tone. The bandit's mouth dropped open. What, who decides if we're best friends? He asked incredulously. Ash leaned over to the bandit. The king. He whispered in awe. The king? He asked disbelievingly. Ash nodded. Yes, and guess what? What? Ash looked ahead of them and pointed forwards. You'll be able to ask him yourself in a couple of minutes if you and I can be friends. May and the bandit's eyes followed to where Ash's hand pointed to. Rising from just below the horizon was the outline of the massive granite castle and the surrounding Petalburg village. We're home. May exclaimed in sheer delight. She felt Blaze pick up to a gallop from their previous trot to reach the castle sooner. The next hour seemed could have been mistaken for minutes as the ground disappeared in a blur underneath the thundering hoof beats. The trio entered Petalburg village, drawing the eyes of farmers and wandering peasants who were heading out to the local tavern for a pint before the moon set, and sleep was mandatory for their day-to-day lives. Blaze's hoofs rang off of the cobblestone road as the group rode towards the towering castle Hoenn. Ash slowed Blaze to a canter as they neared the drawbridge. Two armed guards stepped forward from their posts and crossed their wooden bronze-headed spears, blocking them from entering. Halt! Who goes there? The guard on the right ordered firmly. May opened her mouth but Ash beat her to it. Her Highness May Maple. Ash called back, voice firm with authority. She was pleasantly surprised at his tone. She had seen his fun side, his calm side, she thought his somewhat compassionate side, and now his chivalrous side. They heard the guards muttered between themselves, who are you, rider, and if her highness is there have her speak. My title is Sir Ash, apprentice to Aura Guardian Alyssa Cloud. He nudged May gently for her to speak. And it is me, May Maple, daughter to King Norman Maple of the Hoenn region. She said uncertainly. She wasn't sure how she was supposed to announce her name and that she was indeed there. The guards quickly stepped aside and made way for the road-weary travelers. We're sorry for holding you up, your highness, we had no idea you'd be returning from your trip so soon. The guard apologized sincerely. May waved it away. It's all right, no harm done. But would you happen to know where my father is? She asked politely. He nodded. The king is in the throne room, he's currently in a meeting however. The guard informed. May smiled and thanked the guard before turning to Ash and gave him a nod to continue on. The two rode into the castle and through the courtyard. Over there, May stated, pointing over to a pair of wooden doors. Ash nodded and rode up next to the door before slipping down from the saddle. Offering his hand to the princess, he helped her hop down from the saddle and safely onto the ground. He then looked over to the rapid Ash where the bandit was watching in fright. Walking over, he removed his dagger from his side and slit the ropes that held the bandit's legs firmly together. He then proceeded to lift the bandit onto the ground and kept him steady from falling. Replacing the dagger in its sheath, he looked the prisoner dead in the eye. I know you're scared, but try anything and you'll be dead before you can take 2 steps, okay? The bandit was wide-eyed but nodded. The more cooperative you are, the better your chances are at living all right. Once again the bandit was silent, but nodded. Good, he turned to the princess and gestured for her to lead the way. May did her best to keep herself from running all the way to the throne room. She was ecstatic to be back. She would get to see Dawn, Evie, Johanna, her parents. She was in one word, happy. Climbing the staircase, May quickened her pace, which caused Ash and the bandit to leap into action to match her speed. Turning the corner before the throne room, the three could make out a woman's voice down the hall. "Oh no!" Ash muttered under his breath. May slowed down and turned to Ash. "What is it?" she asked curiously. He sighed. "You'll see," he stated as they turned into the throne room. XXXXXXXXXXX. "Look, I'll go out and look for him and be back in a few days. I don't see the problem here." A blonde, blue-eyed woman in her late 30s or early 40s exclaimed incredulously. The woman wore an outfit almost identical to the one the princess was wearing herself. However, she wore a replica of the hat that Ash currently adorned. The navy black-haired king sighed. "Alyssa, you're making a deal out of nothing. He'll be back in a day or two. He probably got caught up on something, or got lost." Norman replied exasperatedly. "Certainly wouldn't be the first time." Alyssa muttered under her breath before returning to the argument at hand. "I don't see what the problem is. You have no assignments you need me to go on, but yet you want to keep me here for no reason." Norman ran a hand through his hair. "Okay, fine, be back by midday tomorrow with the boy, or else we'll send out a courier to the otherville, May," he asked, standing up from his throne in shock. The princess's face lit up into a grin as she ran to her father. "Dad!" she cried as she threw her arms around her father and cried into his chest. Norman put his arms around his sobbing daughter, and looked at her shocked. "May honey, what's wrong and why are you here?" he asked softly. The answer didn't come from the princess, but another. "I'll be able to answer that, your majesty," Ash said as he bowed to the king. "Ash, where were you and why were you with the princess?" Alyssa asked furiously, marching over to her apprentice. "If I may, your majesty?" he asked accordingly. "Of course, go ahead," the king allowed seriously. Ash stepped forward with the bandit and began to retell the events that unfolded. About 1 week ago the princess left for a trip to the Johto region for personal affairs. 3 days into the trip, her and her escort were ambushed by a group of bandits. Norman looked seriously at the young man. "Where is her escort?" he asked firmly. "Dead, my lord. I found the bodies and carriage buried deep in the forest 11 kilometers south of the border from Hoenn to Johto." Norman nodded gravely and turned to the man at the apprentice's side. "And him?" he asked. "A bandit from the same group. I learned that the carriage was from the castle, and due to the trunks engraved with the royal seal I knew that it was either the queen or your daughter taken hostage." The king nodded. "Continue." "I tracked the footprints and horseshoes and found my way to their encampment. There were a small group of bandits. Most had been killed in the ambush, as your knights were not the only bodies at the scene. I saw your daughter tied to a tree and freed her as soon as it was safe. Once we were a safe distance away, we set up camp and I treated her wound dash." The king went wide-eyed. It pulled his daughter out of the hug and started examining her frantically. "Where were you hurt, honey? Did you break any dash?" "Excuse me, your majesty." The wound was a gash on her forehead, just above the left eyebrow. "It's already started healing. Another day or two and she'll be looking as beautiful as ever," he informed seriously. May's cheeks tinted a light shade of red at his words, and Alyssa raised an incredulous eyebrow at him, as if she couldn't believe what he had just said. The king gently moved a strand of brown hair away from her eyebrow and saw the almost healed wound, and sighed. "You have my sincere gratitude for protecting my daughter. She means the absolute world to me. If anything ever happened to her, I don't know what I would do. There must be some reward for your actions," he thanked as he walked over to the apprentice guardian and held out his hand. Ash took the offered hand and shook firmly. "There are no thanks needed, your majesty. I'd be more than willing to do it again if the occasion ever arose. Just knowing your daughter is safe is more than enough of a reward for me," Ash answered truthfully. The king smiled and clapped Ash firmly on the shoulder. "You have a fantastic apprentice here, Alyssa. one of the noblest young men I've met. Alyssa stepped forward and nodded approvingly. He certainly is, we think he'll go far as a guardian, Ash's mentor praised subtly. Ash smiled and rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. There is one matter left and that involves the prisoner. He began getting back to the topic at hand. Norman nodded seriously, turning to the frightened bandit. Tell me, Sir Ash, you've done an excellent job so far, what do you suggest we do with him? Ash raised an eyebrow at the king's question, not suspecting this at all, but answered, in my opinion, my lord, is that you take him into questioning. He had been no trouble at all during transportation, and may hold valuable information about the ambush. The king nodded thoughtfully, and felt a light tug on his arm. Looking down, his eyes met with his young daughter's. It's true, Dad, even though he tried to lop Ash's head of his shoulder. You could consider them. A grin tugged at the corner of her mouth as she saw Ash roll his eyes and look to the roof in disbelief, muttering something under his breath, best frenemies. The king looked at his daughter strangely, wondering if she had suffered more than just a gash from her head wound. But he quickly turned to the bandit when he started blabbering out, it's true, your majesty, sir, and I are best frenemies, right, sir? The bandit asked frantically, nodding his head up and down. Ash couldn't help the groan that came out when the bandit spoke. No, we are not best frenemies, he stated exasperatedly. But her lady said it herself, you and I were best friends. This time May couldn't help the hysterical laughter that overcame her. She gripped her father's arm tightly and buried her face into his sleeve to muffle the laughter. All right, I'll have a guard escort him to the dungeons. Thank you again for rescuing my daughter, it really means a lot to me, the king thanked again, somewhat hesitantly, as his daughter slowly released his sleeve and hiccuped from trying to quell the laughter that was burning through her. He waved over a guard who took the bandit by the arm and led him out of the room. Ash bowed, no thanks are needed, my lord, I was just doing my duty. The king smiled, all right, thank you again, and have a wonderful night, the king said in farewell as the apprentice and mentor turned and began to leave the throne room. They were almost at the end of the hallway when the king turned to his daughter, so honey, we'll need to reschedule your visit to see Prince LaRousse for next week. Excuse me, your majesty. Ash called back from the end of the throne room. Yes, son? He asked. I recommend postponing the visit indefinitely, as one bandit managed to escape and could have possibly banded together another ambush. Ash informed seriously. The king nodded, very good, thank you for the information. No thanks needed, my lord, good night. Ash stated as he bowed once more and continued out the door after Alyssa. Norman turned once again to his daughter, the boy is right, it would be too dangerous to send you out there again. We'll discuss this tomorrow, go get some sleep, dear, you must be sore after riding for so long. May nodded and hugged her father once more before running out of the throne room and around the corner. Where is he? He couldn't have left already, could he? May thought frantically, looking around the long corridors. She looked left when she heard two faint voices. Sprinting down the hall, she ran down the staircase and spotted two figures walking towards the courtyard gates. Ash! She called out as she ran over to the two guardians. Ash spun around and saw the princess running towards him. May? He asked curiously. May caught her breath before speaking. I never thanked you for rescuing me, she said softly. Ash waved it away. You don't need to thank me, it's like I said back there, just knowing you're alright is enough for me, he smiled down at her. She felt blood rush to her cheeks as they turned a dark shade of red. Well, I still want to thank you for rescuing me anyways. She stuttered shyly. It's no problem, May, I'll see you around, he said in farewell. Yeah, I'll see you around, Ash. Good night. With that, she stood on the tips of her toes and gave him a quick peck on the cheek before dashing off to her room, feeling lightheaded, and very red in the face. Ash stood dumbfounded at what just happened. Good night? He asked unsurely, even though the princess was long gone. Alyssa walked up next to him and raised an eyebrow inquisitively at him. What in Arceus's name was that? I don't know, a thank you gift I suppose. Ash said, continuing to stare at where the princess had run off to. Alyssa shook her head in mild astonishment and amusement. Let's head home, and on the way you may want to inform me of how your mission went, Alyssa stated as she began to walk briskly towards the courtyard gate. Ash snapped out of his daze and hurried after his mentor. It went well, Baron Anthony informed me that in about 2 months' time you'll have that report. Alyssa nodded thoughtfully, before placing 2 fingers into her mouth and letting out an ear-piercing whistle. A silent moment later, an evolved form of Blaze appeared from around the corner and galloped over to Alyssa's side. Simultaneously, Ash and Alyssa swung up onto their respective mounts. The two left the castle and rode in companionable silence until Ash posed a question. So how's Pi Dash? Alyssa cut of her apprentice. He's feeling a lot better, however he's been worried sick about you for the past few days. Ash nodded. I hate leaving him behind, but that fever was just way too high. The two continued in silence through the quiet village until they reached a trail that led off over in direction of the surrounding forest. The two followed the trail which led into the forest and up to a small wooden cottage. The cottage was the size of a small house, a thatched roof had a brick chimney sprouting from underneath it, a small veranda was on the right side of the house, where the moon and sun would be ever present. The apprentice and mentor rode around back to where the stables were located. Dismounting their mounts, the two removed the saddle and bridle and rubbed down the fire types before going back around front. Alyssa pushed open the front door with Ash at her heels. The door shut behind them, leaving the night sky and cool air unable to enter the cozy home. Almost simultaneously, both the princess and Aura Guardian wound up in their respective beds and fell into a deep slumber, with their dreams being close to identical and both being on the same topic. Each other. Chapter 5. A high-pitched shriek sounded through the hallways of Castle Hoenn, waking all of its sleeping inhabitants. The princess's eyes gradually slid open as the high-pitched sound grew continually louder and louder until it seemed almost right outside the door to her room. Pushing herself up from her sleep with one hand, she drew back the white curtain that hid her from view right as her bedroom door flew open. Standing in the door frame was a grinning brunette with an EV at her side. Dawn? May asked wearily. May. Dawn squealed as she ran over and jumped onto the princess, enveloping her into a massive hug. May gasped as the air was driven from her lungs at the impact. Let go. She choked. The princess's maid quickly released her with a massive grin on her face. May, what are you doing home? She asked frantically, 100 questions running through her mind. May pushed herself up and stretched her arms in the air. It's a long story. May was tackled back as a brown blur threw itself into her chest, knocking her onto her back. Eve cooed happily, snuggling up close to the princess. May giggled and stroked the little fox's fur. Hey Evie, I missed you too. Were you good for Dawn while I was gone? Evie replied with a delightful squeal and by giving the princess a lick on the cheek. Good. She sat up on her bed and placed Evie onto her lap. So why are you back? The brunette asked impatiently. May sighed and begun to retell her friend about the past week, and then someone put a hand over my mouth and dash. Who was it? Dawn interrupted excitedly. It was an Aura Guardian. He was the one who got me out. Dawn went wide-eyed. An Aura Guardian, but Miss Cloud was in the village. Who was it that helped you? Her apprentice Ash Ketchum. May smiled softly. Dawn gasped. Sir Ketchum saved you? He's so cute. She exclaimed dreamily. He is. But anyways, after he freed me from the ropes, he carried me to his dash. Dawn interrupted again. He carried you? May hung her head bashfully. Yeah, my legs had fallen asleep and I couldn't walk, so he carried me over to Blaze his Ponita and we rode to his camp. Was he nice? She asked curiously. Whenever I see him around the village, he's usually with a yellow thing and Miss Cloud. May grinned and nodded. He's wonderful, he's nice, funny, sweet, mysterious, and he treated me more differently than anyone else had before. Dawn furrowed her eyebrows in confusion. How so? Well, he acted as if I wasn't part of the royal family. He treated me as if I was just normal. He literally dragged me out of sleeping, which was a shocker to say the least. He dragged you out from your sleep? May nodded. Yeah, I was still fairly sleepy, but we had to hit the road, so he grabbed my legs and pulled me out of the tent, then carried me over to the saddle. He sure sounds like quite the charmer, Dawn joked, but was pleasantly surprised when the princess nodded slowly in agreement. Well, he certainly made an impression on me. Her face turned a delicate pink. Her maid raised an eyebrow in surprise. May? Dawn asked suspiciously at her friend's behavior. Yeah. What are you wearing? She pointed out, giving a slight nod to the clothing that the princess currently adorned. The brunette looked down and saw that she still wore the blue tunic and belt that Ash had given her a few days prior. Oh, Ash forgot to get me a vest when he went through my clothes, so he went through your clothes? Dawn smirked. May shook her head disapprovingly at the brunette, but instead of answering she stood up and went over to her closet, and pulled out a white-sleeved dress that reached her ankles. She went behind the screen in her room and began to change. So any news with Paul? She asked curiously. Oh. Well, not really. But we talked yesterday. Dawn stuttered, turning red in the face. About what? Did he ask you to the festival? May teased playfully. No. Well, I talked about it, and he mostly just commented on what I said. So the usual then, huh? May giggled as she stepped out from behind the screen with the tunic and belt folded in a neat stack. Yeah, you could say that. She then pet her head sideways curiously. So what are you going to do today? I mean, what about your visit to Prince LaRousse? Is that still happening? May shrugged. I dunno, Dad said we'd talk about it today, so we'll see. Dawn nodded and stood up from the bed. So should we grab some breakfast? A grin spread across the princess's face. I couldn't think of anything better, but somehow we need to return these, she stated as she gestured to the clothing in her hands. How about after breakfast we go bring them to where he lives? Dawn suggested as the two girls and Pokemon left the room and begun the walk to the kitchens. Do you know where they live? May asked curiously, looking sidelong at her companion. Dawn shrugged. Not completely. There's a trail that leads over towards the forest. Apparently they have a small cabin there. Alright, let's hurry and grab something to eat and let's get going. May exclaimed as she grabbed the brunette's wrist and took off around a corner and out of sight. XXXXXXXXXX. After a light breakfast, the two females each mounted an elegant Rapidash in the courtyard and set off towards Petalburg village. The sun was full in a clear cloudless blue sky. The mild temperature mixed with a cool breeze which gave the makings for a perfect day. The two large fire horses' hooves rang off the cobblestone road as they passed wandering merchants and farmers, who bowed and muttered greetings towards the princess and her maid. So which way? May asked, glancing sidelong towards Dawn. The brunette looked around before pointing off towards a small cluster of buildings, one of which had a roughly carved picture of a bird hanging from above the door. I'll check the inn, someone there must know where they live, Dawn answered as they rode up next to the building. I'll be right back. With that she slipped down from the saddle and disappeared into the inn. May sighed as she waited. She couldn't come up with a reason why, but for some unknown reason the young Aura Guardian seemed to be constantly in her mind. Even though they had only known each other for a couple of days, she couldn't help but feel like she wanted to grow closer to Ash. Then there was the kiss. It was just on impulse, but as soon as her lips made contact with his cheek, she had almost fainted. She wasn't sure why, but she did. She kept telling herself that the reason was because of the long traveling they had done, that it had worn her out more than she knew. But then why was she embarrassed about it? It was just a thank you gift for rescuing her. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So why did it embarrass her? Her thoughts were disrupted by Dawn, who was currently sitting next to her, waving hand in front of her face. May, you alright? Dawn asked, trying to break her friend's dazed gaze. May blinked. Oh yeah, I'm fine. Did you find out where they live? Dawn looked at her curiously, but shrugged it away. Yeah, if we continue down the main road and take a left 3 blocks down we'll come across the trail that leads to their cabin in a few minutes. With that the two left then in and continued on their way towards the cabin in the woods. Turning left, the pair saw the dirt trail that led away from the village and over to the neighboring forest. Minutes passed and they reached the edge of the forest. Dark shadows loomed over them from the massive clutter of trees. Slowly the two continued on in a trot through the eerily quiet bush. Dawn snapped her head to the left. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. May shook her head. "No, what did you hear?" she asked nervously. The forest was unnerving, it was dead quiet, the trees were silent and it seemed like time itself had stopped. "Listen," she whispered, as she looked into the thick foliage that surrounded them. May listened closely, and after a moment of pure silence, she heard a quiet but deep thrumming sound. It sounds like a bow," May guessed. She received a nod of agreement from her partner. "How deep in is T-?" Both girls' heads snapped forward when a bright neon white flash lit up the forest a few yards away, followed by a scream. May gasped, she knew the sound of that voice. "Ash!" she yelled as she drove her heels into her Rapidash's side and took off at a gallop towards the scream. "May wait!" Dawn yelled after her, but it was to no avail. May bounded around a corner, and the small cabin came into view. But she didn't stop. She rode around the back of the small home and looked around frantically for some sign of the Aura Guardian. She felt her heart leap into her throat as she saw him lying motionless on the grass some 50 meters away. She leapt down from the saddle and sprinted over to the prone figure. She fell to her knees and gently touched the slightly charred face of the Guardian. But as soon as her hand made contact with his skin, she jerked it away as a light shock zapped her. "Ash?" she whispered worriedly. "You missed." Ash called out as he sat up and cracked his back, seemingly unaware of the princess beside him. "Ash, you're all right," May exclaimed as she took the Guardian into a tight hug. Confused, Ash turned his head and saw the princess. "May?" he asked curiously. May let him go with a light pink gracing her cheeks at how close their faces were. "What happened? You screamed, and there was a flash," she exclaimed worriedly. A grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. He pointed over towards a tall pine tree 30 meters away. "Missed." The princess looked over to the tree right as a small yellow figure leapt off a branch 3 meters high and onto the ground. "Chuka pai chupikapi chuka." The small yellow creature exclaimed as he marched over to the two sitting on the ground. "You did too. Your timing was off and you're still not 100%. Just accept it, you know it's true," Ash stated bluntly. The small mouse shook its head. "Chupikapi, Pikachu pika pika." It then turned to the princess and pet its head sideways. "Chuka." Ash took the little mouse into his arms and held him in front of May. "May, I'd like you to meet Pikachu. Pikachu, I'd like to introduce you to the princess May Maple." May stared at Pikachu and Pikachu stared back. Both seemed to be assessing each other. Pikachu turned to Ash and smirked. "Chu Piku Cha Pikachu." "No, she really is the princess, right May?" May stopped staring at the little mouse and turned to Ash. "Yeah, I'm the princess." "But what is Pikachu?" she asked curiously and somewhat nervously. Pikachu climbed out of Ash's arms and onto his shoulder. Ash stood up and picked the longbow of the ground up and offered his hand to the princess, which she graciously took. "Well, he's my partner, right buddy?" "Pi Pikapi." "Your partner?" "I thought that dash," she was cut off. "May, is everything alright back there?" Dawn called out from around the side of the cabin. "Yeah, come on out, Dawn," she replied. Emerging into view, Dawn looked around the small clearing and rode over to the Guardian and princess. "Is everything alright? Was it you that screamed?" she asked curiously looking at Ash. He chuckled. "Yeah, that was me." He held out his hand. "Ash Ketchum, nice to meet you." Dawn took the hand and shook. "Dawn, it's a pleasure to meet you too." "So?" Ash began curiously. "What? Why are you guys here? I mean, I'm drawing a blank here." May's eyes widened as she remembered. she rushed over to her Rapidash and removed the blue tunic and belt from the saddle bag. She returned back over to Ash and handed him the clothing. I didn't get a chance to return these, so, here we are. He smiled, thanks. He looked into the sky and gazed at the position of the sun. That should be enough training for now. Would you two like to come in for some coffee? He offered. Dawn looked over to the brunette and gestured for her to answer, yeah, we'd love to. May said a little too quickly, which earned her another curious glance from the brunette. Great, Alyssa's out right now, but she should be back in an hour or so. With that he led the two girls and their mounts over to the stable and tied their bridle to a post before heading back around to the front of the house. After you, he said politely, allowing the two females to enter first. They both smiled, however May let out a tiny giggle at his manners. The two stepped foot into the cabin. The first thing they noticed was how neat and tidy the home was. They stood in a joint living room and kitchen area. The kitchen housed an assortment of pots, pans, and knives, along with a wood stove and small pantry. The living area was fairly comfortable. A rectangular table was placed in between a sofa and chair, while on the wall opposite of the couch a brick fireplace was next to a wooden door that led to the porch. The factor that stood out the most was the range of colorful vased flowers assorted around the home, giving the room's color. Wow, this is really nice, Dawn said quietly. The small home may not have much, but it certainly had plenty of appeal to it. Thanks, make yourselves comfortable, Ash said as he entered the kitchen and pulled out 3 cups before going over to the stove. So Ash, how is it that a Pikachu is your partner? Shouldn't you have a Lucario or Riolu? May asked genuinely curiously. Pikachu ran over to where the princess sat and curled up next to her. Well, that's an interesting story. How long ago was it, Pikachu? 3, almost 4 years now. Ash asked as he poured coffee into each of the cups. Pai cha, Pikachu answered. Right, well, you know how Guardians have a Pokemon that uses aura? Ash asked the two girls, bringing them each a cup. They nodded, and both mumbled thanks for the drink. Well, Alyssa never had a Pokemon, it was always just us, Blaze, and Flare. Flare? Dawn asked curiously. Ash nodded. That's the name of Alyssa's Rapidash, as Blaze is my Ponyta. Anyways, growing up I never saw the reason for me to be given a Riolu egg. I wanted to be like Alyssa, no Pokemon except for our horses. So why do you have Pikachu then? Ash took a sip of his drink before continuing. Well, I followed Alyssa's example of not having a Pokemon for a long while. Then one day Alyssa and I were returning from Kanto from a courier assignment. We were at the border from Kanto and Johto, right, Pai? There was a nod of agreement from the tiny mouse. Well, while we were riding down the road, I felt something. I wasn't sure what it was because I was still learning to widen my senses with aura, but I could feel something in pain. I dismounted and started looking around the trail we were on, and then I heard sound come from a clump of tall grass. He cleared his throat and took another sip before placing the coffee onto the table. I took my bow from the saddle and went over to see what was there. I pulled back the grass and saw Pikachu with an arrow lodged in his side. He looked over to the yellow mouse and sighed. I didn't know what Pikachu was at first, so I called Alyssa over. She said he was a semi-rare species. She told me that legends said that the small creatures could harness the power of lightning. And can he? Dawn whispered excitedly. A smile tugged at the corner of Ash's mouth. The reason I screamed was due to one of Pai's thunderbolts ending up going off target and striking me instead. Pai chu pika pika, Pikachu stated, rolling onto his back. Ash shook his head in amusement and continued, well, at that I was curious, and worried. I took the first aid from the saddle bag and went over to Pikachu. Alyssa said that I was too late, and that he'd already lost too much blood. I didn't listen. I went to remove the arrow from Pai, but he bit me when I tried to touch him. But after a bit of showing him that I meant him no harm, I removed the arrow. He trailed off and repositioned himself. And then I did something I shouldn't have. Pai Pikapi Chu Ka Pai. Pikachu exclaimed, getting up from where he lay and jumping over to Ash's lap. I know I'm glad I did it, but remember what would have happened if Alyssa wasn't there. Pikachu's ears drooped to the side and nodded. What happened, Ash? May asked curiously. Obviously he had done something wrong, but she was drawing a blank as to what it could have been. He sighed. Well, Alyssa was right, Pikachu had lost too much blood and wouldn't have been able to live for more than an hour or so. But I wouldn't have that, so I used Aura. May pet her head sideways and opened her mouth to speak, but Dawn asked what was on her mind for her. How did you use Aura? It can't heal people, can it? Ash nodded slowly. It can, but to try and heal someone if very risky. It involves transferring the user's life energy to another. For those who have mastered Aura, it's still fairly risky but not as bad as someone who hadn't used it before. Like me. What's so risky about it? May asked worriedly. Well, there is a very high chance of fatality if the user has no skills in healing, and uses up too much of their energy. May gasped. So you're telling me you? Ash nodded. I didn't want to see Pikachu die, so I used Aura to heal him. And since I had never done it to such an extent, or at all before, I was completely drained. So my heart rate began to decrease quickly and everything went black. Next thing I know, it's a few hours later and I'm waking up at a campsite. But how? You died? Well, Alyssa had done to me what I had done for Pikachu. And boy was she furious. That was definitely the day she began to keep a closer eye on me, keeping me from doing anything I shouldn't. But what about Pikachu? Dawn asked, perplexed at the situation. Well, Pikachu was healed, but still had a small limp. And when he saw that I gave my life for him, he followed Alyssa to where we were camped and came to see if I was alright. Then basically from there it's history. Pikachu and I got along well, so he came with us. At first he felt he owed me for saving him, but now we're best buddies, right, Pi? Ash asked as he scratched Pikachu under the chin. Pi Pikapi. Pikachu agreed delightedly. So what are you two doing today? He asked, changing topics. May and Dawn looked from one another and shrugged. Well, nothing really, I'm going over to the battle school later. Other than that, spending time with May. Ash's curiosity was aroused at that. Why are you going to the battle school? Are you delivering a message or something? Dawn blushed and looked down. Oh no, just going to see someone. May smirked. She's got a crush on one dash. May. Dawn shrieked incredulously. She turned quickly to Ash. I don't have a crush on anyone, she dash. Yeah, you do, you visit him practically every day. She retaliated. Dawn was as red as a tomato berry as she stuttered for an answer. Well, we just talk. Well, you talk and he listens. Who is he? Ash asked, tilting his head to the side. No one. A guy named Paul, purple hair, quiet, never smiles. Ash turned to Dawn with half astonishment, half amused smile on his face. You like Paul Stone? He asked disbelievingly. No, you know him? Dawn asked, seemingly forgetting her previous embarrassment. Ash nodded. Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. We train together, and on occasion he'll come on a mission or two with me. And you like him? Dawn blushed again. Well. Maybe. No, I don't know. Well, maybe you'd like some info on him. Ash grinned, kicking his feet up onto the table and placing his hands behind his head. Dawn's face lit up. Really? Yeah, and is what May said is true? You visit him a lot and he mostly listens. Dawn nodded shyly. Don't go see him for a few days. Ash stated in a matter-of-factly tone. What, why? Because Paul lives off of a daily routine basis. Do you talk to him at the same place each time? Dawn nodded. Is it around the same time each day you visit? Once again she nodded. If you want him to take notice, don't show up for a few days. Go back in like 3 days or so and he'll be curious. It'll be subtle, but it will get his attention. Dawn's face was pure joy at this information. Do you really think this will work? Ash nodded in confirmation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Dawn squealed as she leapt off the sofa and took Ash into a tight hug. He chuckled. No problem, Dawn, glad to be of service to you. The princess couldn't help the slight tingle of jealousy she got when she saw Dawn hug Ash. She knew it was in thanks, but still it annoyed her. So how about you, May, what are your plans for today? She shrugged, nothing really, I just need to talk to Dad about what's going to happen with visiting Drew and that's about it. Well, if for some reason you do end up having to go see him, I'd happily be willing to escort you there personally. Ash informed, smiling. May grinned and her cheeks turned a delicate pink. Thanks, but I think with what you said last night I won't be going. But if I do end up going, I'll make sure to let you know. Dawn stole a glance at the princess and saw the light blush on her cheeks, and tucked the thought away for later. While it went unnoticed by the two females, the young guardian's cheeks turned a little red from another event that occurred the previous night as well. How about you, Ash, what are you doing today? Just taking Pikachu over to a friend of mine's for some medicine, other than that probably going to have dinner at the inn with Alyssa. May's head shot up as an idea appeared, come have dinner with us. She exclaimed. Both Ash and Dawn had the same puzzled expression, huh? They said simultaneously. May grinned, yeah, you said while we were coming back that you'd only eaten homemade meals and at the inn, so how about come for dinner with us? But isn't it a little bit short notice? And doesn't this need to be cleared with your father first? Ash asked unsurely. She shook her head, he'll be fine with it, so do you want to come? She asked excitedly. Ash nodded, sure, I don't see why not. When should I arrive? Sometime around 7. Ash smiled, alright, sounds good. Suddenly May stood up grinning and grabbed Dawn by the wrist, great, we got to get going but we'll see you tonight. She announced as she and her maid rushed out the door and out of sight. Ash was about to comment on the quick departure when the door opened and the princess stuck her head back in, bye. With that she disappeared from sight. Ash and Pikachu stared at the door in pure confusion. What? What just happened, buddy? Ash asked, clearly perplexed. Ka. Pikachu shrugged unknowingly. Ash stared at the door an extra moment, huh? With that he stood up and went to get another cup of coffee. Chapter 6. Ash rode purposefully through Petalburg village. It was 1 hour before he was to have dinner with the royal family and he had one last thing he had left to attend to. He and Pikachu had gone to receive Pikachu's medicine an hour or two prior, and now he was on his way over to the Red Tail Low Inn, Petalburg's resident tavern. The sun had begun to slowly vanish behind the horizon, filling the sky with a serene orange glow that showed the coming summer months. Ash rode Blaze up alongside the inn and slid down from the saddle. I'll be back in a little bit, you can just relax for now, okay? He asked as he stroked the pony's nose. Blaze whined in acknowledgement and shook his mane at the guardian's words. Smiling, Ash walked over to the splintered wooden door of the tavern and pushed it open. Stepping inside, the smell of freshly baked breads, cooking meats, and the light odor of alcohol filled his nose. The tavern was fairly empty except for a few men who were sitting at a round table gambling, and behind the bar counter was a young woman with shoulder-length orange hair, cerulean eyes, wearing a dress with an apron over top. The young woman looked up from the cup she was cleaning with a rag as the door shut. Seeing who entered she smiled and waved him over. Hey there, Ash, she called out cheerfully. Ash grinned and strolled over to the bar and sat down on the stool in front of the red head. Hey mist, how are you doing? He asked happily. She shrugged and set the cup down. Same ol' I suppose. How'd your little mission go? I was beginning to think that you'd gotten lost. Ash sighed. Well, actually that's what I came here to talk to you about. Misty raised an eyebrow in confusion. You really got lost again? I thought the dash. Ash cut her off by chuckling lightly and raising his hand. No, not about getting lost, but it does involve my trip. She pet her head to the side. How so? She asked, fairly confused at the aura guardian. Ash pursed his lips as he thought of where to begin. Well. He began slowly. Everything went fine, it was just the usual go deliver the letter, get a reply and come back, right? Okay, I'm with you so far. So I'm on my way back and I come across an area on the road that's been roughed up, there's blood soaked into the dirt and stained. On the dash, Misty waved her hand dismissively and made a disgusted face. Please spare me the details, you know I have a weak stomach. Ash nodded apologetically, sorry, so anyways I looked around the road and in the surrounding forest there was a carriage and some bodies. And when I inspected the carriage and bodies it turned out they were from the castle. Misty's eyebrows rose in surprise, but nobody had left the castle for anything except for Princess Maple a week or so ago. Well, this is kind of what I wanted to talk to you about. You see, the princess had been ambushed by a group of bandits and had been taken hostage. And I sort of rescued her. He stated a little uneasily. Misty gaped, you rescued the princess? She exclaimed in shock. She couldn't believe it, her little Ash was growing up, going on missions by himself, fighting groups of bandits, and now rescuing princesses. Where did the time go? Yeah. It's just odd. She could hear the uncertainty in his voice. What's wrong, Ash, something bugging you? She asked kindly. He nodded slowly, well, you see, May is. He stopped as he thought of the right word, I guess you could say. Special. Two things ran through Misty's mind, one was that he called the princess by just her name without the title, and two, the special part. What do you mean by special, Ash? You need to be a bit more descriptive here. She said firmly, but not unkindly. Well. I don't know how to put it without it sounding strange. He said honestly. She waved it away, strange is better than nothing, so let's hear it. Well, May. The day after I got May out of the bandits' camp, we were on the road to the castle when the bandits came and tried to get her back. Long story short, I stopped them and took one as hostage. Misty nodded and gestured for him to continue. Well, she was in shock from what happened. Fighting, as you know, isn't the prettiest things, so I held her to help her calm down and... He trailed off as he repositioned himself to be more comfortable. And? Misty asked curiously. And well. I felt weird, I suppose. Define weird for me, please. Well, it was a weird feeling in my chest. I didn't want to let her go because if I did I was afraid that something would happen to her. And I didn't want that. She wasn't sure, but Misty was beginning to piece together what was going through Ash's mind. Ash, what do you think of the princess? She asked plainly. He shrugged, I dunno, she's nice. He answered briefly. Misty shook her head, oh come on, what do you really think of her? No need to feel embarrassed or anything. He sighed, well, she's nice, a good sense of humor, she's pretty, warm, and yeah. He replied honestly. He looked up from the counter and saw the red head with a smirk on her face. What? You think she's pretty? She asked bluntly. He felt blood rush to his cheeks as they turned a light red. Well, yeah. And what do you mean by, she's warm? When we were riding back I had to keep an arm around her and she was warm, and then when she sewed up where the crossbow bolt went into my shoulder, her hands were soft and warm. His cheeks were red in embarrassment as he said that. Is that all? Misty asked seriously. She knew what was wrong with him, but she wasn't going to let this opportunity slip by to tease him a bit. He shook his head. There is one thing that happened. His cheeks turned a darker shade of red just at the thought of it. And that is? She inquired. Well, last night when Alyssa and I left the castle, May came down and kissed me on thick. He mumbled the last part quickly, hoping that the heat he could feel in his cheeks would fade away. Ah, Misty cooed teasingly, my little Ashie has been smitten by the princess, how adorable. Ash gaped and went wide-eyed, me Misty. How, why would you say that? He asked incredulously. She leaned over the counter and pinched his cheek, oh, you're growing up so fast now, aren't you? Misty. He whined. He wanted to hide as the other occupants in the inn began to turn and look over towards them. So you've got a little crush on the princess, why did you come here for help? She asked bluntly as she reached under the counter and pulled out another cup. I don't have a crush on her. Geez, Mist, you really aren't one to beat around the bush, are ya? He asked as he took the offered cup of water. She shook her head, nope, but why are you telling me this? I mean, I'm still a little out of the loop here. Ash nodded and took a draught of the water. Well, this morning she came by and returned a tunic she borrowed, and I invited her in for coffee. Then she invited me to have dinner with her and her family. Misty was stumped, she had not been expecting that. Are you going? Yeah, I'm heading to the castle after this, so. Okay, I'm going to be blunt here, Ash, do you have a crush on the princess? She looked him dead in the eye, looking for the small glimmer of falsehood in his answer. I don't know, I might. I'm not good with this type of thing, that's why I came to you. Misty nodded, she knew that this was an iffy subject for the Guardian. Okay, any idea if she likes you? He shrugged, no clue, he answered truthfully. Well, Ash, just do what you've been doing when you go see her tonight. That's all I can really say. If you want to see if she's got any feelings towards you, compliment her and see if she blushes, or make a bad joke and see if she laughs. Does that really work? He asked disbelievingly, it all seemed too easy. Compliment her and tell terrible jokes. It seemed far too easy. Yup, keep it subtle and you should do fine. Smiling, Ash thanked the redhead, thanks for this, Mist, I know I can always come to you for advice. Misty waved it away, no thanks needed, Ash, that's what friends are for. You better get going if you're going to make your hot date on time. Ash spat out the water that was in his mouth and looked at Misty with red cheeks. Meisty. She giggled, oh calm down, Ash, I'm just teasing you. Ash sighed and stood up, alright Mist, I'll see you later. He said in farewell as he began making his way to the door. Alright Ash, I'll talk to you later, and if you need any other help feel free to stop by. Ash grinned, thanks Mist, I can always count on you. He pushed open the door and stepped out into the sunset. He put his foot in the stirrup and pulled himself onto Blaze. Alright Blaze, our next stop is the castle. He took the reins and turned Blaze to face the road which led towards the castle near the horizon. XXXXXXXXXX. Dawn watched interestedly as the princess searched through her wardrobe for the perfect dress. It wasn't something that happened very often, and she found it quite entertaining. So why exactly do you have to wear something elegant? Why not just wear what you've got on right now? Dawn asked teasingly. She had begun to put the facts she had noticed earlier about May together, and if what she thought it was turned out to be true, she'd be giddier than the princess. Because I can't go to dinner like this, she waved a hand across her body. I look hideous, I'm dirty, hair is windblown, and it's just not right. Are you looking to make an impression on Ash? She asked curiously. Of course. She exclaimed as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. She turned back to her wardrobe and began picking through the dresses when she stopped. Had she really just said that? She turned back and looked at Dawn, who had a large smile plastered on her face. I mean, I don't want him to think of me as a slob, right? She added on hopefully. Dawn shook her head slowly, the smile turned into a grin with a glimmer in her eye. Or maybe there is another reason. Right, May? She asked cheekily. May felt her cheeks go red, and no, I mean, what other reason could there be? She stammered as Dawn got up off the bed and began to inch her way closer. Maybe. You've got an ulterior motive behind all this? You never invite people to dinner other than me, let alone a boy. She squealed silently, the look on May's face confirmed her suspicions. She was redder the apple-red dress she held in her hand, and had a horrified look on her face. You've never taken interest in any of the battle school knights, nor anyone around the castle. So maybe Sir Ash, she said his name slyly, has unintentionally smitten the prin dash. A dress hit her in the face, stopping her from continuing. May stood horrified and embarrassed. The usually bubbly Dawn had pieced together her own thoughts in less time than it had taken her. You're crazy, Dawn, Ash and I are just friends. Dawn dropped the dress on the floor and squealed, oh May, you like him. She leapt forward and took her into an excited hug. I like him too, you should definitely get together, you're cute together even though it was Dash. Dawn. May shrieked in embarrassment. She was barely able to understand what was going on, while Dawn prattled on about how good they would look together. Dawn gasped, "Are you going to ask him to the festival?" she asked in surprise. The princess stood speechless. Dawn was ecstatic over what could be a crush on the young guardian. She however was a nervous wreck. She knew what was in her future and she couldn't possibly get together with Ash even if she wanted to. Her father's arrangement with the King of Johto still remained intact, and she knew it was only a matter of time until Drew proposed. And whether she wanted, which she didn't, or not, she was going to be forced to accept, or else war would ensue between the two countries. "No, Dawn, I'm not, even if I wanted to, it's not possible," she stated, quickly removing a white sleeveless dress that reached just above her ankles from the closet. Dawn's expression fell. "What, how come?" "Because of my bloody father, remember." Dawn frowned. She wouldn't say it out loud, but she disagreed with what the king forced upon his daughter. May was practically a sister to her, and to see her unable to be happy due to something her own family put on her, was hard to watch. "There's got to be some way to get around that, I mean. What if you and Ash are real dash?" "Dawn, we aren't even together," said from behind the changing screen. Dawn huffed out a sigh. "Say you were, and your dad saw how happy you were. He would have to cancel the agreement, right?" May stepped out from behind the screen. The dress ended just above her ankles, and defined every one of her curves. "How do I look?" Dawn's jaw dropped. "How long have you had that?" May shrugged and spun around, the silk material swaying lightly around her. "I dunno, a year or so." "You look absolutely gorgeous. Sit on the bed, I'll do your hair." Dawn squealed delightedly. May did as told, and for the next half an hour the brunette braided the princess's hair while discussing her situation. Eventually Dawn finished, and examined her work. "Wait until Ash sees you, he's gonna drop dead." May blushed and murmured her thanks. "I guess we should go down there and wait for him." Dawn nodded and followed after the princess out the door. Together the two girls started for the courtyard. Going down the stairs, a faint clashing of steel could be heard coming from the dining hall. "What's going on in there?" Dawn asked as they rounded the corner. What they saw stopped them in their tracks. Max had his sword drawn and was on the offensive as Ash parried, deflected, and blocked each of his strokes, while her dad watched with interest from the side. "Ash, Max, what are you doing?" May cried out in shock. Max swung an overhead cut at Ash, who sidestepped the slide, and then swung a downward cut at the sword, pushing it firmly to the ground, followed by his boot on the point to keep both swords pinned to the ground. Max panted and looked away from his sword to Ash's eyes, which instantly told him the sparring was over. "That was good, Max, for not a lot of experience you've got plenty of potential," Ash complimented as he resheathed his blade. Max nodded and followed Ash's example. "I can't believe you managed to block each of my strokes without even trying. I swear I had your style figured out seconds into outduel. You've got to show me some technique sometime," Max said adoringly, before looking past the Aura Guardian to his sister. "Oh hi, May and Dawn." Ash tuned to follow the younger prince's gaze, and as soon as his eyes landed on the brunette he was breathless. She looked absolutely stunning. "Hey guys." Ash got out as the two girls came over to them. "What were you two doing in here?" May exclaimed incredulously. "Sir, Ash was early and I showed him in, then we got on the topic of chivalry and then dueling, and I bet I could be him. But I didn't." May turned to Ash. "Is that true?" She suddenly felt self-conscious as Ash stared at her, mouth slightly open. "Ash?" she asked timidly, color rising to her cheeks. "You look amazing, May," he breathed, still dazed by her appearance. Dawn giggled behind her. "He's right, honey, you look beautiful," Norman agreed. "Thanks you guys." She looked to her dad. "So how much longer until dinner?" "William has everything prepared, so we are just waiting on your mother." Eventually the queen arrived and their supper began. Chef William had prepared nothing short of a feast. Breads, meats, salads, alesh, baked goods were set across the large dining table by servants who were hustling between the kitchen and table. Ash sat between the princess and Dawn, who were opposite of Max and the queen, while Norman sat at the head of the table. "This looks amazing, your majesty." Ash said in awe, never in his life had he seen so much food in one place. The king chuckled lightly, it tastes better than it looks, help yourself, there's plenty to go around. Ash nodded in thanks, before placing a small helping onto his plate and digging in, making sure to eat at a steady pace. So Ash, when do you think you can give me a lesson? Max asked excitedly, the prospect of training with an Aura Guardian was too good to be true. He swallowed before answering, whenever you like, I can come to the castle, or if you wanted to you could stop by the cabin and practice there. Whichever is more convenient for you. Do you think you could come by early tomorrow? Ash furrowed his eyebrow in thought until a glimmer came to his eye. How about this, would you like to get the full Aura Guardian treatment? He asked curiously. What do you mean? I'll show up around dusk, and we can do the standard training and drills I do daily. It's not easy, and I'll have to alter some of the exercises because you can't use aura, but it gives you a lot of practice in many skills that will come in handy in combat. Max's eyes lit up with excitement. That sounds great, I'll be sure to get up early and then meet you in the courtyard. Sound good? Sounds good. Ash turned his attention to the king, who was listening to the conversation with interest. That is, if it is all right with you. Norman smiled and nodded his approval. Indeed it is, there are skills that a guardian know that could be quite useful to a knight in training. Ash turned to May to pose a question, but stopped with interest as he saw her shoveling food into her mouth aggressively. She stopped as she felt his eyes on her. Turning her head, she flushed in embarrassment at the amused grin on his face. I see that it's true about your appetite. The princess swallowed and chuckled nervously. Yeah, I can't really help it, sorry. She noticed a certain sparkle in his eye as an idea seemed to come to him. May, would you care to make a bet? He asked bluntly. May wasn't an idiot, she knew where this was going, and what would that be? I bet I can eat more than you, he stated simply. May snorted in amusement at the challenge. No offense, Ash, but you've only finished a quarter of your meal. There's no way, Dash. She stopped as he started laughing quietly. Yes, but I'm in the presence of the king and queen though. He turned to the king and queen. Your majesties, would it be all right if I put aside my table manners for a moment? He asked with a toothy grin on his face. Norman looked at Caroline with an amused smirk on his face. What do you say, dear? Do you think the boy has what it takes to out-eat May? Caroline looked Ash up and down. I'm not sure, he could try, but I have yet to see someone out-eat her, so if May accepts your challenge, then it's fine with us. So May, are you up for it? Dawn suppressed a giggle as she watched May watch Ash. Out of everything that would come out of this dinner, the handsome young guardian had issued an eating challenge to her. I don't know, I mean you've barely eaten as is, and to catch up, so we dash. Is that a yes? He asked excitedly. Only if you're sure, I don't think you know what you're getting yourself into. Hang on a moment. Ash began loading his plate with a large assortment of meats, breads, fruits, and a bunch of miscellaneous items. Are you ready? May sighed but nodded in acknowledgement. She couldn't help but wonder why he had issued an eating challenge. Was it to embarrass her, or was he actually serious? Taking the thought away, she resumed eating her dinner in the same manner as before. After about 10 seconds, she glanced to her left and choked on a piece of meat as she saw Ash already 3/4 done his mountain of food. He caught her glance and smirked. Didn't expect this, did ya? With that he began consuming once again. She realized this was a genuine challenge, and there was no way she was going down without a fight. The next 5 minutes were silent as Norman, Caroline, Max, and Dawn watched in horrified fascination as the table was cleared of food. Never had they seen someone who could match, let alone pull ahead of their daughter while eating. The kitchen staff had even come out to watch the two battle head to head. Eventually the time came when a fork hit a cleaned plate and a groan escaped. The princess slumped back in defeat. Ash had beat her. How in Mew's name did that happen? And not only that, she'd regret these thoughts later, but she was a little turned on by Ash as he ate. That was amazing! Max exclaimed in utter disbelief. Ash, how? How? That's all he could say. How could anybody possibly eat so much yet not pass out? Ash finished off a drumstick and smiled, years of practice. That, and it takes a few weeks after a mission to refill completely. You go light on the rations so they last, but it keeps your stomach empty. Max just shook his head in disbelief. This was just too much. Ash turned to May with a soft smile. How ya doing? The princess groaned and shoved him playfully on the shoulder. You only won because you took me by surprise, that's all. Ash chuckled lightly. Would you care for a rematch sometime in the future? He joked. May grinned. You bet, and next time I'll be prepared. Oh May honey. Norman interrupted quickly. Yes Dad. We've come up with a solution to your dilemma. Huh? She asked, confused by what he meant. With Drew, we've sent a carrier Pidgey off to their castle. If everything goes smoothly he should arrive in about 1 week's time, where he'll be spending time here at the castle for a month or two. May's previous cheerfulness was instantly dispelled. He's coming here? She whined in disbelief. Yes, we wouldn't dare send you out after what happened. And besides, he'll be here for the festival, and you know the legend. Yes Dad, I know, but I highly doubt I'm going to fall in love with Grasshead under the moonlight, or at all thinking about it. Just give him a chance May, it's been years and dash. And he hasn't changed a bit, I guarantee you that he'll be the same stuck-up son of Dash. May, watch your tongue. Caroline chastised sternly, that's no language for a princess. May opened her mouth to speak, but Ash stepped in. Excuse me your majesty, but is it true Sir LaRousse is an experienced rider? The king turned to Ash curiously. Why yes he is, why do you ask? A thoughtful expression took over the guardian's facial features. No reason, it was just a rumor I had heard. May noticed a similar glimmer in his eye like when he came up with the idea to challenge her to the contest. Now she couldn't help but wonder what he was up to. So Ash, are you going to the festival? Dawn piped in cheerfully. He shrugged, possibly, I haven't been before so we'll see. The table was shocked. How come? Everyone goes, it's the biggest festival of the year. Max asked in pure disbelief. The falling of the Blue Rose Festival happened once per year on a specific day. The festival was created after the legend that said long ago when the first king of Hoenn proposed to the woman who would be his queen, was during a time of war when regions fought to conquer enemy territories to expand their kingdoms. When a full moon was in the sky with a pale blue glow, the king had presented a red rose to her, before departing to fight for their region, but the moonlight had changed the red into a deep blue which glowed under the night sky. The king had returned victorious and returned to his queen, where they were married under the very moon the king had proposed under. And over time the blue rose became the symbol for strength, love and beauty. It was a symbol in which one placed their love and strength in someone important to them. Showing them what they mean to the other, that they would always come back. Something always came up. Sometimes I was gone with Alyssa on a mission, I've been sick twice on occasion, but really I spend my time training during the festival. He answered nonchalantly. Why would you train on a day off for everyone else? Dawn asked curiously. This time of year is when a guardian's trial happens. Guardian's trial? Norman spoke up for Ash. Yes, a guardian's trial or assessment if you will. An Aura Guardian is given a specific task they must complete on their own at one point each year of their training. And every year the difficulty is increased, am I correct? Ash nodded, yes sir, and since it is my final year in the apprenticeship the trial will be very difficult. It's near impossible to train for as well. How come? The council chooses a task that can range from scaling the highest mountain, leading a rescue mission, courier mission into enemy territories, the list goes on. But whatever the task is it's going to have its own unique flair. The council likes to keep the trials interesting with the oddest task they can think of. Any idea on what your trial will be? May asked curiously. There was apparently a lot more to an Aura Guardian's training than she thought. Absolutely no clue, but when I do I'll be sure to fill you in, he said with a smile. The rest of the dinner went by quickly. No one ate but everybody chat quietly to each other about recent going-ons in the castle and village. Eventually the time came when the king and queen retired for the night, along with Max and Dawn, leaving the princess and guardian alone. The pair roamed blindly around the castle, just enjoying each other's company. However, their time came to an end as they stopped outside the courtyard. The sky was black with shimmering bright stars overhead. "Well, May, I better be going," he said softly to the tired brunette next to him. She sighed sadly. "Yeah, I had a great time tonight, thank you for coming, I had a lot of fun." "I did too." He turned his gaze so that his eyes met the princess's. "Would you like to do this again tomorrow?" he asked curiously. May perked up at this. "Do you mean come and have dinner?" He shrugged. "It doesn't have to be, I was thinking that after Max and I practice. You and I could hang out if you'd like." She smiled warmly at him, her blue eyes sparkling in the moonlight. "I'd love to." She stepped a little closer on impulse. "So I'll see you tomorrow." "Sounds good, my lady," he bowed jokingly, which earned him a playful shove on the shoulder. "Go on and get out of here, you don't want to be late for your training practice with Max, he won't forgive you if you do." Ash opened his mouth to say something, but hesitated and shook it off. "Sleep tight, May, I'll see you tomorrow." "Good night, Ash, see you tomorrow," she replied softly as he turned and left the courtyard. She watched as he mounted Blaze and disappeared into the darkness, a faint glow dimming as Blaze got lost in the darkness. Chapter 7. XXXXXXXXXXX. The following week had been stress-free for both the princess and apprentice guardian. Every day since the dinner, they had both spent their time in each other's company, bonding and getting to know each other better. They went riding together in the hills behind the castle, wandered aimlessly around Petalburg village doing nothing but enjoying each other's company, and Ash had even convinced the princess into going fishing along with him and Max, who was becoming like an apprentice or student to him. Overall, the past week had been one of the best for both Ash and May. But as the old-time saying goes, eventually all good things must come to an end, which had happened to be the day Drew LaRousse was scheduled to arrive at the castle. "So Dawn, have you gone to see Paul yet?" May asked her maid as Dawn, Ash, and herself walked over the drawbridge towards the castle. The brunette sighed. "No, I haven't yet." She turned to Ash, who was scratching Pikachu behind the ear. "Do you think it's been long enough? I mean, it has been a week, right?" Ash chuckled lightly. "Sure, I can almost guarantee you Paul will be wondering where you are. I wouldn't be surprised that if in his spare time his thoughts roamed around where you are and why you're not making your daily visits." "Great. I'll go tomorrow a little earlier than usual and surprise him." She was grinning from ear to ear at the prospect of seeing the purple-haired knight in training. "How about you, May, what's the, deal with LaRousse?" Ash asked curiously. He knew of the brunette's distaste for the prince, and heck, he shared it. She groaned and her shoulders slumped. "I don't know, right now all I can do is wait for him to show up. Once he's here I'm going to do my best to stay away from him, but that'll be tough because Dad is determined to make me like him." Ash nodded thoughtfully. "If you'd like, you could always just come over to the cabin and kill a couple of hours over there. I mean, it's better than hanging out with the prince, right?" May grinned and hugged Ash's arm as they continued through the courtyard. "Thanks, Ash, I'd love that." She turned her gaze away from the handsome guardian to the brunette, who was giggling quietly to herself. "And what, may I ask, is so funny? You two look cute together," she giggled girlishly, with a cheeky grin across her face. May quickly released his arm as if it was scalding, going quite red in the face. While Ash's expression was pure disbelief at what Dawn had said, his cheeks were cherry red, mouth slightly drooped open and a faraway stare. "Whatever, Dawn," she huffed, crossing her arms over her chest. Over the past week she had come to terms that she did have feelings for Ash. He treated her special, he made her feel like just a regular girl instead of someone of higher nobility. He joked around with her, told her stories of some of the adventures he's had, complimented her without overdoing it. Her parents actually liked him. There was so much more, and she couldn't help but be attracted to him. "Have you thought any more about going to the festival?" The three sat down on a bench in the middle of the courtyard's flower garden. Ash rubbed the back of his neck. "It depends on how much I practice this week. If I get in more than, say, 72 hours, then sure, but any less I'll have to keep back and practice." Dawn frowned, but accepted the answer. She as well as May and Max had been informed on previous final assessments by Ash, and she didn't blame him for the hard work he was putting in. This was his final test before he was eligible to become a full-fledged Aura Guardian. "Are you going to be going to the festival with Drew?" Ash asked the princess innocently. She frowned. "I don't really have a choice, nobody else has asked me to go." Dawn noticed the hint that was thrown towards Ash, but he didn't let himself show that he acknowledged it. After a brief pause to see his answer, May continued, "Why? Remember when you and I arrived back at camp once I got you out?" She nodded. "Well, remember the story about Blaze?" May pursed her lips in thought until a look of remembrance came across her face. "Yeah, how Drew told you that they were going to do away with Blaze." He nodded. "Yep, that's the one, well over the dash." "Hang on a second, what story about Blaze?" Dawn piped in. She was feeling left out of the conversation. "Well, you see, Ash." A voice called from across the courtyard. Ash turned his gaze to the right and saw Alyssa seated on top of Flare gesturing for him to come over. "Hang on a second." Ash got up and jogged over to his teacher, looking up to meet her gaze. He had to shield his eyes from the sun. "Something wrong?" "We have just been assigned to investigate a series of murders over in Rustboro." His face scrunched up in confusion. "What about Drake? Shouldn't he be the one to investigate this?" Drake was the Aura Guardian of the Rustboro province and its neighboring villages. Ash noticed immediately the flash of sadness in her blue eyes. "Drake's dead." Ash stepped back in shock. It was rare for a guardian to be killed. They were the heroes of Hoenn, and every villager looked up to them during the time of war. They were the guardians of the kingdom. Was he murdered? He breathed in disbelief. She shook her head. No, he and Lance had gone on some assignment that was more than they bargained for. 2 guardians. What about Lance? He was injured. He'll be out of action for weeks. His back and legs were torn up by whatever they went after. My Arceus. He ran a hand through his hair. Did they even manage to stop whatever they were after? Alyssa shook her head. "We can talk about this on our way, but right now you need to get yourself back to the cabin. I've already packed for you, so you just need to pick up your gear." Ash nodded. "Okay, if you go on now I'll catch up in a minute, I just need to say goodbye to the girls." "Alright, don't take too long." She reined Flare around and began galloping towards the drawbridge. Ash stood there another minute before slowly making his way back to the girls. How could a member of the council be killed, and another severely injured? Most of the time it only required 1 guardian per problem. But 2? That must have been some issue. "Hey Ash, what was that about?" May asked curiously. He sighed. "I have to take off. There have been a series of murders in Rustboro, so Alyssa and I have to investigate." "Why are you going to Rustboro? Shouldn't the local guardian take care of that?" As soon as Dawn asked, she immediately regretted it. "The guardian there has been killed, so we've got to go do his job for the time being." "What happened to him?" Ash sighed sadly. "I don't really know. He and another guardian were sent off on an assignment. And only one made it back, even then he was severely hurt." "Did you know him?" "Yes, I knew Drake. I was given my 3rd trial by him a few years ago. It's a DMN shame he's gone, he was a good friend." Before either girl could respond, he let out an ear-piercing whistle and turned at the sound of hoof beats quickly approaching. Blaze galloped alongside Ash before coming to a halt. "I'm not sure when I'll be back, so I'll see you 2 later." He put a foot into the stirrup and climbed onto the saddle. "Are you going to be back for the festival?" May asked quickly. "I'm not sure. It is a 2-day trip from here to Rustboro, so if everything goes smoothly I should be back the morning of the festival, and if not, then it's highly unlikely." "Can you promise me you'll make it back?" she asked softly, her blue eyes meeting brown. He smiled. "I'll do my best, and Dawn." "Yeah." He smirked. "Good luck with Paul." She blushed and mumbled her thanks. "I'll see you in a couple of days, take care." Ash tapped Blaze with the toe of his boot and leapt into a gallop. "Be safe, Ash. We'll miss you." He raised his hand in farewell without taking a glance back as he vanished around the corner and onto the drawbridge. I hope he makes it back for the festival. Dawn grinned and shoved her playfully. Were you looking forward to a dance under the moonlight with Sir Ash? She asked cheekily. May's cheeks tinted pink, but she stood her ground, and if I am? That was all she needed to say for Dawn to let out an excited squeal. Well, let's plan ahead and pick out what you'll wear. She took the brunette's hand and together they dashed into the castle. XXXXXXXXXX. A few hours passed, and eventually it was time. Drew LaRousse had officially arrived at the castle, and she along with Dawn were on their way to greet him. Kill me, May whispered quickly as they took their time going down the staircase. Just power through this, say hi, show him to his room and then tell him when dinner is so we can leave. Dawn stated seriously. Do you think Ash would mind if we actually went and used their cabin? Dawn snorted in amusement. I doubt it, from what you have told me it sounds like Ash isn't too fond of LaRousse either. The pair stopped at the bottom of the stairs and took a deep breath. Forcing a smile onto her face, May stepped out into the courtyard and headed over to where a large ensemble of soldiers and a carriage lay. She walked over and stood next to her father, who had come down as soon as he had heard the royal family from Johto had arrived in the village. A knight who wore a blue and white tunic over chainmail went over to the carriage door and opened it, stating, "We have arrived, Your Majesty." Stepping out from the carriage was an older man around the same age as her father. He had short dark brown hair, a prominent nose, and green eyes. Following him out of the carriage was a young man about the same age as her with lime green hair, green eyes, and a solid posture. He wore a dark green tunic over a long-sleeved white shirt, with brown breeches and a sword on his hip. The Johto king stepped forward to greet her father. Norman, it is a pleasure to see you again. It's been too long. Norman held out his hand and they shook hands. That it has Alexander. I'm sorry again for the inconvenience of having you come all the way out here at your expense. He waved it away. It is no problem at all. He turned to May and smiled warmly. Are you all right after your little adventure? He asked kindly. Yes, my lord, thank you for asking, she replied with a warm smile. Now Alexander was a good king, and a nice person. She really didn't have anything against him, except for the arranged marriage part. While Drew, well. Alexander gestured for Drew to step forward. He flicked his green hair out of his eyes and produced a rose from his tunic. It's a pleasure to see you again, May. Reluctantly she took one of the soon-to-be many roses and kept the smile plastered to her face as much as it pained her. And I'm thrilled to see you again, Drew. May I show you to your quarters? That would be lovely, Maybelle. Her eye visibly twitched as he used her full name. Just by those 5 words, she knew he was going to be a pain. After you, he swept an arm out, gesturing for her to lead the way. Taking the opportunity, she began walking swiftly back towards the castle doors with Drew quickly in tow. Once they entered the castle, Drew spoke up. So how are you feeling after your little abduction? She frowned. I'm doing fine, thanks. I'm just thinking that the knights here must be well undertrained to fall to a brigand of bandits. They can be considered child's play, he said nonchalantly, looking around the hallways they strolled through. The knights trained at the castle are the finest in the kingdom. They were overwhelmed by force and fell to the enemy. And it would do you good to respect the fallen, May spoke calmly, but on the inside she was already seething. He had been there for less than 10 minutes, and he had already mocked her by using her first name, insulted Hoenn's knights and those who were killed protecting her, and honestly she didn't want any of this. They continued in momentary silence until Drew noticed something. It's pretty bare in here, no tapestries, vases, and sculptures, nothing appealing to the eye. It's all just stone, doesn't it get boring? Dad finds those sort of things unnecessary. We may have wealth, but that doesn't mean we spend it on useless art. Drew nodded thoughtfully. It could still use some color though. The prince turned his gaze to the princess and gave her a once-over. You look beautiful, May, but there's something different about you that I can't quite put my finger on. She blushed ever so slightly at the compliment. She looked him in the eye and saw him analyzing her. You're more developed than before, he stated in a matter-of-factly tone. May's eyes turned into saucers, unbelieving that he had actually just said that. "Excuse me?" she asked incredulously, just to make sure she had heard properly. "Well, it's true, Maybelle, you've grown up and so has your dash." He didn't get any further as a smack sounded throughout the castle as May's hand made contact with his cheek. "You sick pervert!" she yelled furiously, "your bloody room is down the hall and second on the left." With that she stormed off the opposite way in search for Dawn. How dare he say things like that to her? You don't speak like that to a girl, let alone a princess, for Mew's sakes. Going past the dining hall, May spotted Dawn walking towards the staircase that lead to her room. "Dawn!" May shouted firmly. Usually she never used her superior voice to the brunette, but right now she was furious. Dawn spun around and rushed over the brunette. "May, what happened?" she asked instantly, her eyes showing concern. "Come with me, you and I are going to take Ash up on his offer and use his and Lady Cloud's cabin for a while." With that she grabbed Dawn's wrist and pulled her towards the stables. Half an hour later, the two were sitting on the couch in the Aura Guardian's cabin drinking coffee. "Are you sure this isn't trespassing?" Dawn asked nervously. The princess nodded. "He gave us the go-ahead, so as long as we replace the coffee beans then we'll be all right." The following conversation that took place was about what the prince had said to her, and that if he couldn't keep his mouth shut, there wouldn't be a wedding because he'd be 6 feet under. Eventually, the girls knew they had to return to the castle for dinner, and reluctantly returned, knowing a rough few weeks were ahead of them. Especially for the princess. Chapter 8. "I think he's trying to impress you," Dawn muttered offhandedly to the brunette who leaned lazily against the fence of the training arena. The princess and maid had been assigned by the king, to show Drew around the castle and village. They had taken him on an extensive tour through the castle and then decided to take him to the battle school, at Dawn's request. "You should get Paul to spar with him, we might get a show." The pair was watching Drew practice with the trainees in a dirt arena with a white circle painted on the ground. The two combatants had to stay within the boundaries of the circle. The person who steps or is forced out of the circle is declared out, while the victor remains in the center for as long as he is victorious. And right now that was Drew. "If you wait here I'll go see if I can find him, I bet he'd love the chance to fight the prince." The brunette shot off before the princess could reply. Sighing, her thoughts drifted to the prince, who was on the offensive using a flurry of overhand, side cuts, uppercuts, feints, and blocks to aggressively push back his opponent. It had been 2 days since Ash had left, and every moment since, she had either been with Drew, or trying to sneak off to Ash's cabin where Dawn would stop her before she could escape. Apparently she had been given orders by her father to keep her and Drew together. But Drew was too arrogant for his own good. He believed that just because he came from royalty that he could say or do whatever he wanted. At dinner yesterday, he had scolded a server for bringing him a cup of what he had called bland, unsatisfactory coffee. He had flirted with the occasional girl around the castle, not that she was jealous, but that he was supposed to be getting to know her. And throw in an occasional compliment, rude comment, and a rose here or there. It was exactly the same as it had been the last time she saw him. She wished Ash was there. She smiled softly at the thought of the handsome raven-haired guardian. In only 2 weeks, they had become almost inseparable since they had met. And now that he was gone, a part of her felt empty. She missed him. His smile, his eyes, that cute toothy grin. She let out a content sigh at the image of the guardian. Her guardian, as she would like to think. But she knew that it couldn't happen, even if she wanted it to. "Okay, so just go up and challenge him, all right?" May snapped out of her reverie, turning to see Dawn speaking to a purple-haired boy with an emotionless expression on his face. He had a wooden practice sword and shield wielded as he stared at the prince, who had a sheet-eating grin on his face about his 3rd victory. "Why am I doing this troublesome?" he asked dully. A smirk found its way onto Dawn's lips. "Because, if you win you can take me to the festival." May gasped silently to herself. She didn't expect Dawn to be so forward like that. "And if I lose?" he scoffed. "I get to take you to the festival." She answered smartly, "Now go get 'em, Polly." The purple-headed warrior looked at her blankly, before walking off towards the center muttering something about her being troublesome under his breath. Dawn skipped merrily back to the princess who couldn't believe what had just transpired. "Dawn, did you?" She grinned, and winked knowingly to the brunette. "I just got a date for the festival." The two girls squealed excitedly before turning to the arena where Paul stood waiting for the current fight between Drew and a blonde to finish. XXXXXXXXXXX. Pikachu, do you still have track of that scent? Ash asked from atop of Blaze. He, Pikachu, Alyssa and their mounts rode steadily down a winding dirt road that led away from Rustboro. The trio had arrived at Rustboro Castle 5 hours beforehand and searched each of the murder scenes. Each of the victims, 3 in all, had had their throats slit and valuables stolen. Pikachu had picked up a familiar scent at each of the crime scenes and was now trailing it. "Pi Pikachu, Chikapi Pi Pika," Pikachu replied in confirmation, nose twitching as he smelled the light breeze in the air. Ash turned to his teacher who was beside him on Blaze's evolved form. "Alyssa?" The older blonde looked at the boy she considered a son and raised an eyebrow. "Yes, Ash. If we find the killer, would it be alright if we left for the castle as soon as possible?" He asked curiously. "Are you in a hurry for something?" She smiled kindly. Ash shrugged. "Sort of, I'd like to be back in time for the festival," he informed rather shyly. Slowly Alyssa's smile morphed into a teasing grin. She could read Ash like a book. She had raised him as her own son, as well as training him to the aura guardian he was today. And she knew when he was hiding something from her. Would this happen to deal with a certain brunette princess? She asked slyly. Ash's eyes snapped away from hers, his face flushed in embarrassment. Where did you get that idea?" he asked innocently. She giggled lightly. "A certain red-headed friend of yours." "Misty," he muttered under his breath accusingly. It wasn't her fault though. He should have expected her to inform Alyssa about his princess problem. "Yes, she seems to be quite intrigued with how you and the princess have been getting acquainted," she teased, flashing him a slick grin which made him turn beet red. "Well, yes. It does have to deal with May. I'd like to get back so she doesn't have to spend the entire time with LaRousse," Ash stated defensively. Alyssa leaned back in the saddle and examined her apprentice. He was good at masking his emotions. But when it came to feelings he didn't understand, they were visible to anyone who knew him well enough. And right now she could see impatience in his eyes. "Say we get back in time, what do you plan on doing with May?" His eyebrows furrowed in thought. "Maybe ask her to dance. It doesn't really matter as long as we spend time with each other," he answered honestly. A smile found its way onto her lips at the answer. "And you still plan on challenging the prince?" He nodded instantly. "That's right. I think Blaze and I have the best opportunity to show them what a great Pokemon he is." "Right, Blaze?" The fire type nodded his head twice in response. "I know I'm a little out of the loop on what's going on between you and the princess, but maybe you'd like a little help for when you get back," she stated positively. The raven-haired guardian knew little to none about romance, and she knew he could use some advice. Ash grinned. "That'd be great, Ally, it. Chew chuppy Pikachu." Pikachu alerted, instantly leaping off of Ash's shoulder and onto the ground. They reined in and watched the electric mouse intently, before listening for movement. "Is he near, buddy?" Ash asked quietly, reaching for the bow on the side of the saddle. "Pai cha Pikachu." Pikachu pointed off into the bush and nodded. Alyssa gave Ash a nod and the two dismounted. "Leave your stick, bows only, it's too dense in there for a proper swing." Ash frowned at her choice in words. Swords weren't exactly favored by aura guardians. They stuck with bows and staffs, keeping away from messy conflict. However, he did as told and unclipped the two-handed sword and attached it to his saddle bag. Removing his quiver, which was loaded with 24 black-ed arrows, he slung it across his back and followed his teacher into the dark forest. XXXXXXXXXXX. Paul grunted angrily as he was driven back under the repeated combination of overhand and side cuts. He had seriously underestimated the Prince of Johto and now he was paying for it. He slashed away a stab and went for the prince's exposed midsection. Drew took the blade harmlessly across his shield and stepped forward, driving the wooden kite shield into Paul, shoving him to the ground and out of the ring. "Paul, are you all right?" Dawn cried out as she ran over to the downed purple-haired boy. Picking himself up off the ground, he shrugged his shoulders. "Troublesome," he stated in greeting at her concern. "You're in your 5th year, yes?" Drew asked curiously, sliding his practice sword into its sheath. "Yes, sir." "It's a shame, I thought you'd be more of a challenge." Paul clenched his fists tightly around the hilt of his sword, but held his anger at bay. Drew turned to May before he could respond. "So what do you think?" he asked, flashing her a dazzling smile showing his pearl-white teeth. "I think you reek of sweat, so while you're cleaning up, Dawn, Paul and I will see you later," May huffed irritably, crossing her arms over her chest. The three turned and strolled out and left the prince to his own device. "He's arrogant and cocky, but he does know how to fight," Paul stated seriously as they rounded a corner towards the barracks. "So Paul," Dawn began cheerfully, her smile lightening up the mood. He grunted in acknowledgement. "You will be stopping by the castle around 7 the day of the festival, right?" He blinked twice as he remembered the deal. He sighed. "We'll see, troublesome." With that he stalked off to change from his training attire into clean clothing. Dawn grinned triumphantly. "He's acting all grumpy, but I know he wants me," Dawn announced positively. "Now we just need Ash to show up and everything will be perfect." The princess sighed. "I hope he will be there." She trailed off in thought. "What do you think he's doing right now?" XXXXXXXXXXX. Shrubs and protruding branches tugged and scratched irritably against his body. The thick forest was filled with large bushes and fallen trees. The two guardians had been tracking the fugitive for over 2 hours and only just now were they starting to find his tracks. They had been able to deduce that the killer was in fact a man due to a large boot imprint they had come across in the dirt half a kilometer back. The forest was quiet, with the occasional beating of wings as a tailo or other bird Pokemon flew away from its perch from the two individuals. Ash looked far into the distance for some sign of movement or a crushed plant, scuffle of a boot print, anything to pick up the pace of the hunt. He stopped walking and motioned for Alyssa to do the same. She was 30 feet to his right for extra surveillance. With one last glance around, he went into a crouch and shut his eyes. A cool feeling flushed across his body, the familiar rush of energy beginning to kick-start his heart into a rapid drumming. Getting up from his crouch, he opened his eyes, which were no longer the auburn shade they used to be. His eyes were a mesmerizing cobalt blue that shimmered with life. The forest stretched apart in front of him, a clear line of sight hundreds of kilometers ahead of him colored in dull shades of blue and gray outlining every hill, tree, rock, and detail in the environment. In an instant the land around him rushed by underfoot at an unbelievable speed, weaving up and underneath fallen trees, through bushes and shrubs. Until it came to a sudden stop. A man with a dark aura pulsating from his body trudged wearily down a hastily made path, a potato sack being dragged beside him. The man stumbled and dropped the sack. He cursed, picking back up the sack he carried on. Ash shut his eyes. After a moment of hesitation he snapped them back open. He stood in the same position he'd been in, except with Alyssa at his side waiting patiently. "What did you see?" she asked seriously. 7 kilometers that way, he pointed towards the north. "He's tired, but he is walking on some sort of path, to where I don't know. Come, let's pick up the pace. If we catch up with him before nightfall there is a slight chance you will make it back in time." Ash nodded in response, and together they started out in a jog towards the escaping fugitive. XXXXXXXXXX. It was well after nightfall by the time they reached the murderer. Instead of catching him while sleeping, they had found him in the middle of a small encampment of 12 or so armed men. The guardians were lying on their stomachs in the shadows of the tree-line. "Mercenaries?" Ash asked quietly. "Possibly, they are too disorganized to be assassins. And if they were bandits they would have been stupid enough to try and raid Rustboro for whatever reason to kill those people." Ash nodded thoughtfully. "Plans?" Alyssa pursed her lips, musing over a solution until she turned to Ash with a glimmer in her eye. You make the call, you will be graduating soon, and this is the type of situation that happens on a common occurrence, as you know. Ash met her eye and then slowly nodded before turning back to the encampment. 5 tents were arranged in a semicircle around a blazing bonfire. 3 Magikarp carcasses were slowly rotating on a spit above the roaring flames, where 11 men, some armed, others not, sat talking quietly to each other. Fourth from the left, that's our man, Ash muttered to Alyssa. She nodded in response. It will take us from at least now until dusk to get back to Blaze and Flare. Even longer if we keep the others alive. Alyssa remained silent, judging how her apprentice decided to handle this. Pikachu can stun and then I can get in and out with our guy, but then we'd have to deal with the others anyways. So either way, these men are going to die. Ash turned his gaze to his teacher. You take the 6 on the right, and I've got the 4 and our target on the left. She nodded in silent agreement. In unison, both apprentice and teacher silently stood up in the shadows, bow at the ready. Without losing sync, they reached back into their quivers, removed, knocked, and drew back an arrow to full draw. On my mark, his voice was just audible as he took in a deep breath, hearing nothing but the steady drumming of his heart. He released the breath smoothly across his lips. Fire. Chapter 9. The princess was a blur as she raced down the stairs of the castle and out into the courtyard. It was the morning of the festival, and Ash was to have arrived that morning. She pushed open the stable doors with surprising strength, surprising the few caretakers at the sudden entrance. She marched over to the nearest caretaker and requested one of the Rapidashes from the closest stall. Climbing onto the saddle, she nodded thanks and quickly set off for the cabin in the woods. Dawn would be going to wake her in the next half hour, and Drew would be. Well, she really didn't care as long as it didn't involve her. She, however, was going to be there as Ash returned from his mission, giving him the biggest smile and hug she could possibly give him. Afterwards she and him would wander the village and go see the final preparations for the festival, before finding Dawn and Paul to go to the festival together. It would be perfect. Her heart began to speed up as she rounded the final bend before the cozy cabin came into view. Rounding the corner she felt a pang of disappointment to see the small stables devoid of either horse. But she wouldn't let that deter her. Riding around the stables, she dismounted and tied the reins to a post before going around to the front and going into the cabin. She smiled at the little home. If she wasn't a princess, she'd definitely want to live in something similar. She decided to get a small pot of coffee brewing. One thing she had learned from the 2 guardians, is that they were addict to the stuff. She got the pot going, and pursed her lips in thought. She had some time to kill and there wasn't much to do in the small cabin except to read. Her eyes were drawn to the lone hallway in the home. There were 3 doors, one being a closet, the other 2 being Ash and Alyssa's rooms. She had yet to actually see the young guardian's room, and now that she was alone, curiosity began to get the best of her. Going down the short hallway, she stopped at the door on the left. Slowly turning the knob, she eased the door open and peered inside. The room wasn't very big. A made bed sat in the far right corner of the room. To the left of that, was a wooden desk with a vase of colorful flowers brightening the room with color. A wooden stool sat in front of the desk. A closet housed identical uniforms that Ash wore daily, the blue tunics, gray long-sleeved shirts. A small bookshelf was filled with old books, looking to be well over 30 years old apiece. All except for one book that could have only been a few years old. Curious, she walked over and removed the book, carefully reading the cover. The Second Age War. Her eyebrows furrowed in thought. The Second Age War had been the most recent war involving Kanto and Hoenn, just about 19 years ago. The war had been her father's first real test as king. Kanto had crowned a new king for the first time in 40 years, and had given the crown to a dictator. The new king had secretly readied his armies to launch an assault to conquer Hoenn and expand Kanto. The attack had been launched, taking out small villages at first before her father began to fight back, summoning his armies for war. The war raged on for months, until Hoenn called to Johto for aid to push back the Kantian forces. Her father had fought alongside Alexander in the front lines with the Aura Guardians as they repelled the Kanto forces until they reached Kanto's own capital, Viridian. Reaching the capital, her father and Johto's king had captured the city along with the corrupt royal family of Kanto, the king, queen, and son. The very day they were captured, all three had been executed to end the war once and for all. The new king of Kanto was the brother of the previous king to continue the bloodline. The war came to a close with Kanto in need of repair of their government, and an agreement made between the two kings of Hoenn and Johto. One that remained till that very day. She mused over the book a while longer, before returning it to its rightful place on the shelf and returning to the coffee. She waited patiently in the living room for an hour and a half until her hopes slowly began to diminish. They should have been back by now. Sighing, she got up off of the couch and tossed her coffee grounds into the fireplace, before finding a piece of paper and writing down a quick note to her guardian. Ash, meet Dawn and I at the castle at 7 May. Placing it onto the kitchen table, she left the cabin and returned to her Rapidash before setting off back to the castle for breakfast. XXXXXXXXXXX. Dawn, how much longer are you going to be? The princess asked irritably, her foot tapping the ground in annoyance. The brunette turned to May, frantically brushing her hair down to remove all unwanted knots. I'm almost done. You know what the air does to my hair when it is humid out. On humid days like it was today, Dawn had uncontrollably frizzy hair that stuck out in every way imaginable. I know, but you were supposed to be down there half an hour ago. I wouldn't be surprised if Paul has left without you, she stated seriously, crossing her arms. Dawn stopped mid-slide. You mean leave without us? And he wouldn't just leave, he is too much of a gentleman for that. A moment of silence passed between the two, right? May raised an eyebrow in response, which told the answer for her. Okay, let's go. Dawn yelled as she leapt up from her seat on the bed and taking the princess' wrist before dashing out the door. The two rushed down the hallway, down the stairs, and out into the courtyard. Torches were lit around the castle walls, lighting the courtyard with an orange glow under the night sky. The stars twinkled brightly next to a pale blue moon which radiated an ice-blue glow. The girls noticed a purple-haired boy standing idly in the center of the flower garden. He wore a mareep-skin vest over a long-sleeved white silk shirt. Dawn grinned as she saw the knight in training. Together she and May walked over to Paul. Hello Paul, she said softly with a hint of nervousness lingering in her voice. He gave a half bow. Dawn, he turned to acknowledge the princess. May, he greeted as well. Paul. He turned back to the princess's maid and pulled a light blue rose out from behind his back and handed it to her. Blue roses were made around this time of the year for the festival. Red roses were dyed white, and then a pale blue to match the moon. Dawn's cheeks were dusted by a light pink as she took the rose. Thank you Paul, she said softly, meeting his gaze. As the two made small chat before they left for the festival, May kept her eyes fastened on the drawbridge. Ash had yet to get back from his mission, and now it seemed with every growing minute that he wouldn't be back in time for the festival. She felt an increasing wave of despair as she realized he wasn't going to make it. She really wanted him there, it would have made the night perfect. She turned back to Dawn and Paul and put on a forced smile. So should we get going? She asked as cheerfully as she could. Dawn nodded and took Paul's and May's hand. Let's go. XXXXXXXXXXX. After a 15-minute walk, the trio arrived at the village square, where the festival was being held. May and Dawn's eyes were wide and sparkling as they took in the festivities. The streets were lined with white and blue lanterns lighting the streets with a blue glow. Stalls and booths sat along the edges of the streets selling roses, food, drinks, and games. In the very center of the village square was a large pole marquee which had music flowing loudly over the talking of the crowds. The streets were packed with people from around the castle and village chatting to each other, dancing, laughing, and having a good time in general. In the marquee, villagers danced in a large circle to a large assortment of music, fast and slow-paced songs. Where should we go first? Dawn squealed excitedly, her eyes were lit with anxiousness to get the night underway. Paul shrugged as if he couldn't care, leaving it to the two girls to decide, whatever you two would like, he stated calmly. Let's go see what games they've set up. Dawn gripped their wrists tightly and rushed into the crowds of people searching for their first stop of the night. XXXXXXXXXXX. After some time the small group had gone to almost each stall, failing to win at any of the games, which May thought had to have been rigged, and were now standing outside of the marquee waiting for Paul to return with some drinks. What do you suppose we should do next? Dawn asked curiously. The princess shrugged, it doesn't really matter to me. Are you and Paul going to go dance? Dawn dug her toe into the ground nervously, I was thinking about it, but I don't want to leave you all by yourself. May smiled at her friend's thoughtfulness, it's alright if you two go dance to a few songs, I'll be okay on my own, she replied seriously. I don't know, maybe. She trailed off in thought, you've gotten really lucky tonight. The princess's eyebrows furrowed in confusion, what do you mean? Well, we haven't run into Drew at all yet today, you were gone all morning and then you got back and he couldn't find you. She nodded slowly, maybe it's karma, I don't have to see Drew at all today, and Ash isn't able to get back here in time. She sighed sadly. You and I both know that if Ash could, he would be here with us, right? Dawn pointed out seriously, she and May both knew that even though Ash was acting as if he did not want to come to the festival, he would have anyways just to be with them. Yeah, I know, but I still wish he was able to make it. Dawn nodded in agreement as the purple-haired knight in training returned with 3 glasses of red wine in hand. So Paul, are you going to ask Dawn to dance? May asked, taking a sip of her wine. Paul downed his drink and turned to Dawn, would you like to dance? He asked. Dawn wasn't sure how to reply, was he asking her to dance, or was he asking if she would like to dance? I'd love to, Paul, she replied softly. They set their glasses down on a nearby table and started off towards the cluster of dancers. May watched unhappily for her best friend as she danced with the knight of her affections, it really did make the night better to see her sister in all but blood happy. She finished off her wine and looked around the tent for a familiar face, however she could not find anyone. Her eyes slowly trailed away from the dancing couple and over towards the food table where a large variety of sweets lay teasingly. She was fairly hungry, but she would like to avoid the attention of others if she got carried away eating. She smiled softly at the challenge issued by Ash a week ago. Where are you, Ash? She thought sadly. She had grown quite attached to the handsome young guardian, and wished that he was there to share the night with her. Sighing, she turned back to the couple on the dance floor and gasped in shock, her hands covering her mouth in disbelief. Dawn and Paul were kissing. Wow, she stated in awe. There wasn't much else to say, Dawn was luckier than she thought. She turned around to give them slightly more privacy, even though a few from around the tent had turned and looked at the young couple. She instantly regretted turning around. Some 10 meters away stood the boy with lime green hair flashing her a knowing smile, DMN, she whispered sadly as he began making his way over to her. Drew came to a stop in front of May, flipping his hair. He opened his mouth to speak. My lady, May spun around as she felt someone tap her on the shoulder. Her breath caught in her throat as she came face to face with the raven-haired guardian. May I have this dance? He asked, sweeping his arm out to the crowd of dancers. It took her a moment to come to terms that he was there, standing right in front of her. He looked tired, his uniform was wrinkled and dirty, his chest heaved in and out as if he had just gone for a run, but his eyes and smile were dazzling. The smile warmed her heart, and his eyes. Instead of the auburn she knew so well, they were a deep blue that carried too many emotions to count. I'd love to, she answered, leaving a stunned Drew as she took his hand, him leading her to the dance floor. The pair weaved their way through the crowd until they found a relatively spacious area to dance. I can't believe you're here, she grinned ecstatically as she wrapped her arms around his neck, and his arms found their way around her waist. I skipped sleeping, and breaking for breakfast and dinner. I only stopped to give Blaze a rest every so often. He paused before adding, you look beautiful, May. The princess blushed a deep shade of crimson at the compliment. She wore a form-fitting white dress embroidered with silver linings descending from her neckline to the bottom of the dress in flourished curves. "Thank you," she replied softly. Meeting his eyes, not caring if he saw the redness of her cheeks, "Your eyes are blue." He nodded in understanding. "It's a side effect of using aura for too long. I started looking for you before I even entered the village." He looked away from her gaze and added, "I wanted to be able to find you right away." She felt her heartbeat pick up, as she laid her head against his chest. "How come?" she asked timidly. "I'd be lying if I said I hadn't been waiting for the festival so I could ask you to dance," he answered sheepishly, a small grin lingering on his face. She felt his heartbeat quicken to match her own. A smile playing around on her lips forced a question out of her mouth. "Ash?" "Yes, May. What am I to you?" There was silence between the two as they danced slowly in the center of the crowd. Her heart raced with anticipation for his answer. She was taking a page from Dawn's book and being straightforward with her questions and answers. This was her perfect opportunity to reveal her feelings to the young guardian, and find out his feelings towards her. What am I to you?" he replied nervously, avoiding the question. She caught the unanswered question. "You're my guardian," she replied instantaneously. She saw in his eyes, which were returning to the familiar brown, an internal debate in which he was fighting. He cleared his throat nervously. "You're my princess." He blushed as he said it. It sounded corny and he knew it. May grinned cheekily, her cheeks tinting pink. "I'm your princess?" she asked, pulling his head closer to hers. He shifted nervously at how close they were, their faces only inches apart. "Well, only if you want to be. It is your decision after all," he answered shakily. Her heart started racing in her chest as she closed the distance between them. I think I'd like that," she whispered, closing her eyes and closing the rest of the distance between them. "May, I thought you were with Dawn and the purple-haired boy." A voice interrupted quickly, placing a hand on the princess' shoulder and spinning her out of Ash's hold. Her heart shattered as she opened her eyes and saw Drew with a dangerous glimmer and unasked question lingering in his eyes. She looked to the ground, holding back the fury she felt towards the prince. I was dancing with my friend Ash while Dawn and Paul were busy." Drew looked past her and to the Aura Guardian, who watched him passively, with the tiniest smile on his face. "You're her friend, I suppose?" He smirked as if unimpressed. "It's nice to meet you." He trailed off uncertainly. "Drew, Prince of Johto," he stated with a tone of authority ringing through his voice. "The prince who is known for his riding skills?" Ash asked in mock surprise and excitement. May could hear the falsehood in his tone and wondered what he was up to. "Riding, combat, royalty, romance," he stated diligently. "How would you like to have a race?" Ash challenged innocently. Drew snorted in disgust. "I don't race peasants. Besides, the only mount you probably own is an old mule of sorts," he guessed, judging by how Ash's clothes were all ragged and dirty. "May here loves a good race. It tickles her fancy, if you know what I mean." May was about to protest to that sentence when Ash cast her a play-along look. "Oh, yeah, there is something about a winner of a race that leaves me breathless," she stated false dreamily. Drew looked at May curiously. "That's news to me." He trailed off thoughtfully, and after a minute he added, "Where would you recommend a race?" "The trail around Blue Moon Lake," he stated instantly. "It's been used for any racing or jousting tournament for the past decade." Drew looked Ash up and down in evaluation. "Tomorrow at high noon," he stated in more of a statement than a question. "Sounds good to me, I'll see you there." He turned back to the princess, who was listening in confusion. "Would you care to resume where we dash?" "Actually, I'd like to cut in if you don't mind," Drew stated, eyeing the guardian critically. Ash paused thoughtfully. He wanted to continue dancing with May, but he knew that, even though LaRousse wasn't the prince of this region, it was supposed to be Drew and May dancing at this moment. Even if it killed him inside to see it. May saw the hesitant look in Ash's eyes. She guessed, no, she knew he didn't want to leave her to deal with Drew. So she chose to do something that she knew would completely take away her chance at confessing to Ash on that night. Actually, Drew, I am rather tired, so I think I am going to retire for the night and return to the castle." He opened his mouth to object, but she didn't allow him the chance, "So I'll see you both tomorrow." With that she spun around and ran out of the tent, fighting the pressure that was building up in the corner of her eyes. She was so close. So close to kissing Ash, she could sense, even if he didn't show it, that he was angry that they had been interrupted. When he had held her, she felt safe and secure in his strong arms. The warmth she had felt in his embrace was amazing. She missed the feeling as she walked silently away from the festival and through the streets of Petalburg. "May!" A voice called out from behind. She turned around at the sound of his voice and saw Ash running towards her. "Hey Ash, I should get going, I really am tired and dash." He didn't let her finish as he wrapped his arms around her waist and then leaned in and placed a tender, yet passionate kiss on her lips. May went wide-eyed in shock until the warmth she felt took over, making her close her eyes, and arms wrap around his neck, pulling him closer to deepen the kiss. The two stood underneath the pale blue glow of the moon, desperately releasing the pent-up emotions of the past few weeks. The princess forced herself to break the kiss with great reluctance. Her chest heaved in and out as she caught her breath looking into the Aura Guardian's eyes. She slowly brought a hand up to her lips where she could still feel the warm sensation on Ash's. "I've been wanting to do that for a while," Ash said sheepishly to break the silence. She was still speechless over what just took place. Three things ran through her mind as she gazed at the handsome young man of her desires. One was that Ash felt the same way as her, two being she had never felt closer to someone before in her life, and finally that she loved him. Not a crush, but truly loved him. Ash. She was speechless. She wanted to say anything, something to respond to his actions. But nothing came to her mind. He smiled softly and looked into her sparkling blue eyes. He reached into his tunic and produced a dark blue rose. "You left before I could give you this," he said softly, handing her the rose. Her mouth parted slightly at the rose. "It was unlike the others you bought during the festival which were dyed. This rose was a darker shade, and actually blue. No artificial colors, it's beautiful," she whispered in awe. "Where did you get it?" "An Aura Guardian secret," he stated knowingly, flashing her his toothy grin. The princess smiled softly. The rose was absolutely mesmerizing. The petals on the outside were dark before becoming gradually light towards the center. The colors were familiar, as if she'd seen them recently. She looked up from the rose and into his eyes, where she saw a brief flicker of blue in his irises. "Aura." He nodded slowly in confirmation. Aura is a mysterious ability, even guardians are unsure of its full capabilities. "Thank you," she said softly, wrapping her arms around his waist and laying her head onto his chest. Ash gently ran a hand through her long hair. "No thanks are necessary." He trailed off before adding with a small smile, "My princess." The princess giggled lightly into his chest and held him tighter. "Will you walk me back to the castle?" she asked, looking up into his eyes. "I'd be honored." She took his arm and held onto it, resting her head on his bicep. The couple walked slowly through the village, taking the long way around until they crossed the drawbridge and stopped at the courtyard door to the castle. "So?" Ash stated nervously. "So?" she replied, rubbing her arm sheepishly. The two stood in silence as they tried to think of something to say. When do you think you will be up tomorrow?" Ash asked curiously. "An hour or two after dawn. Would you like to go get breakfast with me, and then go for a morning ride?" She smiled warmly at the young guardian. "I'd love to." She quickly took him into a hug, and sighed contentedly as she felt his strong arms embrace her. "I'm glad you're back, Ash," she said softly. "So am I," he replied quietly. She looked up into his eyes, before standing up on the tips of her toes and placing her lips onto his. Closing her eyes, she sighed contentedly as she got lost in the warmth and affection she felt. Ash pulled her closer and leaned down, deepening the kiss with the princess. With a great reluctance, she pulled away, relishing in the final seconds of contact between them before she pulled away. She bit her bottom lip sadly. She didn't want the night to end, but she knew that it had to come to an end. I'll see you in the morning, she stated reluctantly. I'll see you bright and early, good night May. He kissed her briefly, the contact only for a split second before it was removed. May sighed wearily, she longed for the kiss to be longer, but she knew that if they were caught there would be hell to pay. Sweet dreams. Ash placed a final kiss on top of her head before turning away and walking towards the drawbridge and back towards the festival where Blaze was waiting patiently for him. The princess watched as he disappeared into the darkness of the night and out of sight. Closing her eyes, she held the blue rose delicately picturing the sight of her guardian. With one final sigh, she turned around and headed for her room, where she placed the rose right next to her bed and fell asleep to the far-off sound of the music of the closing festival. Chapter 10. This is where we'll make our final push, Ash informed Blaze. Any sooner than this and you will be too tired to make an attempted breakout if Drew is ahead of us all right. He, Blaze and Pikachu stood on the trail that would be their course in the next 20 minutes. It was the evening of the race the young guardian had issued the night before, and now they were making their final preparations for the race. Blaze whined softly in acknowledgement, he was more than ready to face off against the prince. He and Ash would make the green-haired oaf pay for his words all those years ago. Ash shielded his eyes from the sun, his hat was not present as he wore a simple white shirt and breeches instead of his regular attire. He gazed over the lake which glimmered brightly under the rays of the setting sun. A lone rowboat drifted silently as two men fished for their dinner. His gaze trailed a kilometer down the track where a small crowd had gathered for the upcoming event. Word had mysteriously spread of the challenge issued by the Guardian, and now people from around the village, and even the king and Max waited anxiously for the race to begin. His eyes locked onto a single person in the crowd, who wore a red dress and had brown hair. He and the princess had gone for an early morning picnic for breakfast in the hills behind the castle, before going on a ride together through the trails around the castle and forest. He smiled warmly at the thought of the princess. They had yet to actually talk about what was going to happen between them since last night, but he knew that it would be complicated between them at first, but they would somehow be all right. Well, are you ready, Blaze? He asked as he climbed up onto the saddle and took the reins. The rules they were using for the race was that they would complete 2 laps of the lake, which was 4 kilometers per lap. There would also be no interfering with each other's mounts during the race. Any cheating would result in immediate disqualification, and Ash was determined to not let that happen. Blaze shook his head in response. Great, let's head back and wait for LaRousse to show up. The trio started back towards the small crowd and over to the princess who waved for him to come over. Are you two all ready for the race? She asked happily, a grin present on her face. He nodded. Yup, Blaze and I have everything sorted out and now all we need to do is wait for LaRousse. Well, there he is over there, a deep voice from behind Ash stated. The Guardian turned around and saw the king and Max looking up to him. Your Majesty, he greeted, bowing slightly in the saddle, before turning to follow their gaze as to where the prince was making his way over. Are you nervous at all, son? Norman asked curiously. Ash shook his head. Not at all, my lord. Blaze here will have no problem holding his own against and that rapid Ash. The king nodded thoughtfully. That's good that you have confidence. Drew is a notoriously famed rider in the Johto region. So I wish you the best of luck. Thank you, your Majesty. So Ketchum, are you ready to get this over with? The prince asked, looking down to Ash from the saddle of Blaze's evolved form. As soon as you're ready we can get started. Good, then let's get this started. Drew tugged on the Rapidash's reins and lead it over to the makeshift starting line. Pikachu, you stay with the princess, okay? Ash asked, looking up to his shoulder where the electric mouse was perched. Chew. Pikachu leapt off of the Guardian and into May's arms. The small crowd followed behind the Guardian as he made his way beside the prince. Behind him the onlookers passed money around, betting on the outcome of the race. Drew was a famed and skilled rider in the Johto region, and he was a prince. While Ash, however, was a well-known local around the village and castle, and an Aura Guardian. The choice was tough. Ash relaxed his muscles from the anticipation he was feeling. He wasn't nervous, however his blood was pumping with adrenaline which could cause him to think irrationally. The two rode up alongside one another, about a meter's length separating them from each other. Ash saw his friend Brock, who he had asked to start off the race, step forward ahead of the racers. Brock raised a hand above his head, his other currently holding a golden trumpet loosely. The small crowd hushed and he spoke, "Are both riders ready?" He called out, his voice echoing across the silent lake. Drew merely nodded uncaringly, "Ready, doctor," he stated boredly. Ash hid a scowl and gave Brock a confident smile. "All set, Brock," he answered cheerfully. "Move to the line, but remember, if you cross it before I sound the start, you'll have to double back and cross it again before you can carry on." Both riders nodded in understanding, bringing their mounts to a stop 2 feet behind the dirt starting line. Ash stroked Blaze calmingly. He could feel the tension in the horse's muscles, and he needed to soothe him before they made a premature start. "Calm down, Blaze," he whispered, the fire pony's ears perking up at the sound of his master's voice. "We've got this." Drew smirked and looked down from the saddle, seemingly overhearing the guardian's words. "I wouldn't count on it. That dog you're riding will be lucky to make a lap before we finish." Ash shrugged the insult away. "We'll see who's a mutt when this is all over." He took his focus off of the prince and to Brock, as he once again raised his hand to bring the rider's attention to himself. "You may start as soon as you hear the signal." Time seemed to slow down as Brock brought the trumpet up to his lips. Ash watched the slow intake of breath, the doctor's chest expanding with each millisecond. He knew that Drew was watching like a hawk as well. He could sense that the prince he dug the toe of his boot into Blaze's side in an instant, shooting off like an arrow from his own bow as the baritone sound echoed through the lake. He was already off as he heard a shocked Drew yell to his mount to start, obviously shocked at the speed of the small Ponita, putting an early 100-meter lead before the crowd knew what had happened. Blaze's hooves thundered against the earth as he kicked up speed. Ash glanced over his shoulder and saw Drew gaining quickly. If there was one factor that was going to come into play that would decide the victor, it would be determined by the mount. Blaze, the younger, smaller, less speedy horse, but with better endurance and stamina over longer distances. Or the rapid Ash, the evolved faster and stronger horse over short distances. Ash gritted his teeth and hunched low over Blaze's neck, as Drew rode up alongside them. Their eyes met for a brief second before the Johto native urged his mount to go faster. They began inching ahead, a meter at first before that changed to 5, 10, and then finally 20 meters, as they rounded into the forest. The guardian felt Blaze start to accelerate, so he pulled lightly back on the reins to halt that progress. Their time would come to overtake the rapid Ash, but it wasn't yet. They'd have to keep a short distance between them before they showed their true speed. The forest rushed by until it seemingly disappeared, the crystal-clear lake, and small crowd coming into view. Drew had moved up another 20 meters, and was going just faster than a full gallop. "He'll tire it out before we reach the halfway mark of the forest," Ash thought, nudging Blaze with his toe. The small pony tensed before seemingly closing the distance between the two riders with ease. Drew looked over his shoulder with a scowl, hunching lower and nudging his mount with his heel to pick up more speed. The two thundered past the cheering crowd and back out into the distance in a cloud of dust. Ash pulled left on the reins so that they'd be on the inside for the final leg of the race. Blaze began to accelerate, chest heaving, driving his hooves into the ground to keep level with its evolved form. The pair was neck and neck as they entered the dimly lit forest. Drew glanced left to Ash and kicked out with his leg, catching Ash by surprise and hitting him in the shoulder, knocking him halfway off of the saddle. Blaze felt his master tumble to his side and slowed so he could remount, but by the time that had happened Drew had already reached the forest's edge. Ash growled and dug his heel into Blaze. "Drive that mutt and his horse into the ground, Blaze." Blaze whined in response, going from a canter to a full-on sprint in less than a second. The wind rushed through his hair as they gained on the prince. Blaze's legs were a blur as they closed the distance, meter by meter until they were 5 meters behind their opponent and 500 meters away from the finish. Ash heard Drew shout for his horse to go faster. "Come on, Blaze." He yelled, hunching as close as possible to his horse as possible. In their final reserves of strength, both horses were neck and neck, straining to keep pace with each other. Blaze slowly inched ahead of LaRousse, and then before Ash knew it, the race was over. Blaze faltered. It was just a mid-stride, momentary hesitation which gave Drew that extra edge and final push to the finish line. They watched in defeat as the prince thundered over the finish line towards the cheering crowd. Ash sighed and wiped the back of his hand across his forehead, wiping away the sweat that had begun to form. "Slow down, boy, we did our best," he said softly to the trembling horse, which slowed down to a canter as they neared the group. There was a low whine from Blaze as he shook his fiery mane in response. "I know, but to say that they'd think we're poor sports. We would have won. Otherwise, that's all that matters." They came to a stop a few meters behind where everyone was congratulating the prince, all except for one person who ran over and took him into a tight hug as he dismounted. "I'm sorry you lost, Ash, it sure looked like you and Blaze were going to pull it off," May mumbled, looking up into the Guardian's caring auburn eyes. He reciprocated the hug, relishing in the warmth he felt before responding, "We did our best, that's all that really matters." He gave her a small smile before looking up to see the prince walking over to them. As he approached, the two separated and Ash held out a forced hand. "Good race," he stated calmly. Drew stared at the hand before taking it in a hard grip. "The better man won today. Anything about the race you want to say?" Their eyes met and an unspoken message was sent. "No, I don't believe so." "You?" Ash asked, his voice getting edgy. May was able to sense that there was a hidden message being sent between the two. She decided that she would ask what it was later. "Actually I do," Drew stated with a smirk before turning to May and flashing her a slightly nervous smile. He took her hand gently and produced a rose from the inside of his tunic, handing it to her. "May," he said softly. In a slightly louder voice, which drew the attention of everyone around him, he continued, "I was hoping to ask you this last night at the festival, however I had been unable to find you until just before you left. But there is truly no better time than on the eve of a victory to ask you." He got down on one knee and produced a solid gold ring from his pocket. "Will you be my queen?" In an instant, May felt all the color drain from her face as she stared disbelievingly at gold ring, the sunlight dancing across its surface. This could not be happening. No. No, 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 no. She couldn't say yes. She looked away from the ring to Ash, who remained stoic throughout the exchange. She met his eyes asking, no, pleading him to get her out of this. She saw him take in a deep breath before exhaling slowly. Then in an almost unnoticeable movement he nodded his head slightly. Before his eyes returned to the prince, an ice-cold glare driving through his back. She swallowed the massive lump in her throat. Her father watched on intently, his eyes never leaving her, waiting for the answer that she must give. Drew. I don't. She paused to bite her lip. She couldn't do this. She and Ash were just. Anne. Oh God, why her? Drew, I. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Drew. I accept. She finished in just above a whisper. The small crowd roared their approval, while Drew slipped the ring onto her finger. Norman came forward and placed a hand on both his daughter and to-be son-in-law's shoulders. What a perfect way to start a day! He exclaimed ecstatically. On a beautiful morning such as today, we have an excellent race, and now my daughter is to be married. The assembled crowd excluding Ash roared their approval. He looked down to the two beside him. Come you two, preparations must begin imminently, and I must contact your father as soon as possible. May turned to Ash helpless, and quickly ran over to him. Come with me please. She whispered frantically, I dash. May, what are you doing? Her father asked as he mounted his rapid Ash. Ash is going to come along, he's my friend and I want him there to help. She replied hastily, turning back to the Guardian. Please Ash, she whispered, her eyes were petrified. She couldn't do this, she was going to break down. She couldn't get married, she couldn't marry someone she despised. She needed her guardian. Ash nodded slightly before looking past her and to the king. With your permission, of course, your majesty. The king nodded offhandedly, before saying something to Drew and riding away. Go ahead without me, he whispered, I'll be right behind you. I've got to wait for Alyssa to return. She may be able to help with this. May nodded nervously before she was approached by her. God help her, fiancé. He offered his hand to her, now that he was atop his Rapidash once again, to help her to sit behind him. Reluctantly she took his hand and climbed up behind him. They started off towards the castle, while Ash mounted Blaze, with Pikachu on his shoulder and rode off towards the forest. He scowled to himself. This was definitely not the way he had planned for the day to begin. Chapter 11. It had taken Alyssa much longer to return from their mission than Ash had expected. She had arrived back at their small cabin just after Ash had begun preparing dinner. Ash looked up from the pot of coffee he was brewing and to the front door as it was pushed open. "You've been gone for some time," he greeted, pouring 2 cups, and going over to the blonde. She removed her cloak and placed it onto a hook beside the door, before going over to a chair in the living room and sitting down with a content sigh. "I had an errand to run on the way back," she stated, taking the cup of hot liquid. "Errand?" Ash asked, sitting down on the couch with a raised eyebrow. His mentor took an appreciative sip of her coffee. "It's good, almost as good as mine." She grinned slightly at the anxious expression on the young guardian's face. "I'll tell you in a bit, but tell me how it went. Did you ask her to dance?" She saw the flicker of darkness cross his eyes. "Last night went well. This morning, not so much." He paused, looking at the ground uncertainly. "LaRousse proposed." She stopped mid-sip, examining her apprentice crucially, and she said yes. He nodded in response. She placed her cup down onto the table, and tucked a stray strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "And what happened last night?" "We danced." He paused, a light pink dusting across his cheeks. "We kissed." He looked up to meet Alyssa's gaze, and was presented with a smug grin. "And she responded well, I take it?" He looked away, scratching the back of his neck sheepishly. She had to do everything within her power not to squeal like a child. She was in her late 30s, for God's sakes. "Where is she now?" "Up at the castle. I told her I'd be up there with her as soon as you got back." "That was a couple of hours ago." He chuckled slightly. "I guess I best be going then." He finished the rest of his coffee in a single go and stood up. Alyssa reached into her tunic and produced a scroll, handing it to Ash. "What is it?" he asked, looking at the wax seal on the front. "Your final assessment," she stated, taking another sip of her coffee quietly. Ash stared at the scroll in his hand before using his free hand to break the seal. This was it, his final test as an apprentice guardian. This was everything he had strived for in the past 5 years. Unwinding the scroll, his eyes roamed over the words that were inscribed on the sheet. His mouth dropped open at one point, where he looked up from the scroll and to Alyssa. "They can't be serious," he whispered in disbelief. "What is it?" He handed her the parchment for herself to read. She set down her drink and began to read. After a moment of silence, she looked up from the scroll and pursed her lips in a tight line. She shook her head slightly before handing it back to Ash. "To go after that thing is suicide," she stated softly, her eyes meeting his. "But God," she couldn't believe the counsel. "They are your orders." He nodded slightly before sitting back down on the arm of the chair. "But it killed Drake, and DMN well near maimed Lanced. If 2 guardians couldn't take out this," he waved parchment briefly, "then how do they expect me to accomplish this?" She shook her head. "That's for you to figure out. Go to the princess now. When do you expect to leave?" He gestured unsurely. "Before dawn," he answered, standing up. This took Alyssa by surprise. "That's far too soon. You need to prepare for this properly." "You could die, Ash. This isn't Dash. This isn't a game, I know." He paused, looking back down to the scroll. "But if I wait a few months, the wedding could have already taken place. And," he swallowed once before looking up to who he considered a mother, "if I'm going to stop it, I'll have to have my focus completely on that." She nodded slowly, meeting his serious gaze, and gestured to the door. "Go see the princess then. I'll start packing for you. Don't be gone past midnight. If you really are going to leave before dawn, you'll need your rest." Ash nodded and grabbed his hat, bow and quiver, before opening the door. "Thanks, Allie, I'll see you in a bit." XXXXXXXXXX. Going up the stairs, skipping steps as he ascended, Ash strode quickly towards the throne room. As he neared, he was not surprised by the commotion that could be heard. Turning in, he blinked at the cluster of servants standing in line in front of the throne where the king, queen, May, Max, and LaRue stood. He caught the princess catching him enter the room and offered her a small nod. She looked terrified. Her body was tense, her hands wringing each other out in front of her, and she was visibly shaking even from the distance between them. "And Dawn, for the next few months you and my daughter shall be composing the list of guests alongside Prince Drew's advisors." "Yes, your majesty," Dawn bowed from the lineup of servants. "Very good, you're all dismissed for the night." The servants bowed before all but Dawn left the throne room. Once the room was cleared, Ash watched patiently as Drew went over to the king and conversed silently between each other. After a few minutes passed, Drew and the king nodded in some agreement before starting away from the throne. Their eyes met briefly as the green-haired prince walked past him and out into the hall, turning back to where the princess stood, or had stood, as she was now speaking frantically to her parents. He slowly started towards them. "Ash, what happened?" May's completely panicked. Dawn asked desperately, coming in between him before he could get to the princess. "After the race, Drew proposed. It was sudden, says he planned on doing it during the festival but didn't get the chance because May left early. And she said yes." He nodded with the barest traces of a scowl. "She had to, that dash. But I don't love him." Ash and Dawn snapped their gazes to the brunette as she grabbed her father's hands with tears in her eyes. "He'll grow on Dash. No, he won't." She yelled hoarsely, her lively blue eyes on the verge of releasing her tears. "May, you're being unreasoned, Dash." "No, you are, this is so unfair." "May, you need to calm down," Max interrupted cautiously, going over to try and calm his sister. She turned furiously on him. "Calm down. Calm down. How can I calm down when I'm going to be marrying someone I despise?" At that, Max had no reply, choosing to put a reasonable amount of space between them. "May, honey, you may not love Drew at the moment, but over time that will change," Caroline said softly, trying to reassure her daughter. "No, no, it won't," May denied, shaking her head immediately. "I can't love him because I love somebody else." Ash felt all color leave his face as Dawn slowly brought her eyes over to stare at him. She had not just said that. "What?" Norman asked stiffly, craning his neck as if he hadn't heard properly. "I love someone else," she whispered as the tears began to fall freely from her eyes. "Ash?" Dawn whispered with wide eyes, tugging at his sleeve slightly. He tried to respond but no words came out. "Who is it?" her father asked evenly, his tone completely reasonable. She lifted her gaze hesitantly, looking away from her father to the stunned figure of Ash. The barest of smiles touched the corner of her lip. She had just dropped a bomb and she figured he already knew who she was talking about. Ash. The king's eyes snapped immediately to the Aura Guardian, who stood with his mouth slightly open, his eyes hidden beneath his hat. "The apprentice?" he asked verifyingly. She nodded, giving Ash a weak smile before her father spoke directly to her. "I'm sorry you feel that way, May, but you will be marrying the prince." "But..." "No buts. In 6 months you and the prince will be married in Johto, whether you agree with it or not. And you will not tell the prince of this discussion. Now go to your room." "But the dash. You're all dismissed," his voice boomed through the room. His eyes landed back on Ash. "Except you." May's eyes lit up with fear. "What are your dash?" "Dawn, please escort my daughter to her quarters." Dawn hastily came up and gripped May by the arm. "Come on, May," she said quickly, tugging slightly on her arm. She resisted, shaking her head. "What are you dash?" "May," Ash said softly, "go with Dawn." But Ash." He gave her a reassuring smile. "Go with Dawn, we can talk later." The fear he could see in her eyes as she was reluctantly pulled from the room was unsettling. Once Max and the Queen had left as well, leaving him and the King alone, Norman stood up. The King descended the steps from his throne, examining the Guardian, who stood at attention. "I love my daughter, Norman stated, walking up next to the guardian. "I'd do anything for her, but unfortunately the safety and well-being of Hoenn comes before family. One of the toughest hardships you have to face when King." Ash remained silent as the king stopped walking. "When my wife was taken for ransom by the Shinai warriors during a diplomatic visit to Sinnoh, I wanted to take the army and storm their keep without hesitation. But I couldn't. I had dealings with trade routes between us, Kanto and the Orange Archipelago, that had to have new treaties written before war broke loose." He paused and turned his gaze to the young man. "I had to leave her as prisoner for over 6 months because of those treaties, because I could not allow war to break loose. The situation is the same now. To call off this wedding, something that has been in the making for well over a decade, would cause not only distrust between Hoenn and Johto, but for future agreements between Hoenn and other regions such as Kanto." Ash remained silent as the king continued. "Now tell me, young Ash, do you understand the implications of what I'm dealing with?" "Yes, your majesty," he replied, meeting the king's gaze. "My daughter has taken a shine to you, and as much as I want her to be happy, this agreement between Alexander and I holds the future of our regions together." He paused reflectively. "Are her feelings reciprocated?" Ash swallowed nervously. "Yes, your majesty. And for that I'm sorry. 20 years ago, when Alexander and his armies allied with us to repel the Kantian forces, the agreement that my May would marry his eldest son when they were of age was made. I had agreed solely on the necessity of the situation. We were giving ground quickly, and having Alexander threatening to pull out his forces before we had many more casualties caused me to agree to his proposal. Had I never accepted his offer, we would not be here at the moment. Hoenn would have been taken over by Kanto, under the rule of a dictator." His eyes shifted over Ash inquisitively, "and we would all be dead. So I must sever all communications between you and my daughter." He saw the guardian's eyes shut as he continued. "From this day forth you must not contact my daughter under any circumstances." "Yes, your majesty," he breathed. "I cannot allow May to fall deeper into a pit in which there's no light. To allow her to see you would make it harder on her for the day she's married." "Yes, your majesty." Norman saw the pain in the apprentice guardian's eyes and nodded to himself. "Good, you're dismissed." "May I tell her goodbye?" Ash asked cautiously. "Goodbye?" "Yes, your majesty, I've been given my final assessment. I don't know if I'll make it back." Norman pursed his lips before he shook his head. "No, now you may take your leave." Ash bowed before starting towards the exit, his footsteps echoing through the room with each step. "Ash," Norman stated, "I'm sorry." Ash stopped at the door. Without looking back he said, "So am I." XXXXXXXXXXX. May was shaking as she held her knees up to her chest. It had been nearly an hour and she hadn't heard a word from either her father or Ash. She had come to her room and changed into a nightgown at Dawn's request, where she then was promptly left alone with a guard posted outside of her door. She swallowed nervously as another tear streaked down her reddened cheek. She was petrified. She had basically handed Ash's head over to her father on a silver platter at her confession. She hadn't meant to, she had just had enough of everything. She wanted to be with Ash. Nothing else. Her eyes snapped away from the door and to her window as the drape was pulled to the side and the raven-haired guardian pulled himself over the edge. "Ash!" she whispered in relief, rushing over and holding him tightly as started over to her. He wrapped his arms around the princess and held her tightly, closing his eyes at the warmth that washed over him. She looked up from his chest and into his eyes. "What happened?" she whispered nervously. He walked her over to her bed and sat her down. "Your father has banned us from seeing each other." She felt her heart plummet. "What?" A tear streaked its way down her cheek. Ash sat down next to her and took her hands. "He doesn't want me socializing with you because come the wedding it'll be harder on you afterwards." Her mouth moved wordlessly as she tried to think of something to say. "Technically I'm committing treason right now just by seeing you." "Ash, I can't do this," she whispered as he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close. "I can't marry Drew, I can't be apart from you." "What you said, did you mean it?" he asked softly, lifting the princess's chin up so he could see her eyes. She nodded slightly. "I love you, Ash," she whispered as fresh tears began cascading down her cheeks. A small smile touched his lips. Well, then you'll be glad to know that I love you, May. Before she could respond, he brought his lips down and placed them on hers. After a brief moment of shock, she responded with everything she had. Her heart and body were on fire. She kissed him passionately, leaning back so that she lay on her bed and that he was on top of her. She broke the kiss briefly to catch her breath before claiming his lips once again. Her hands ran through his hair, knocking off his hat in the process. He broke the kiss, but she removed a hand from his hair and gripped his collar, pulling him back to her. May. He pulled back only to have himself pulled back down. May, he said a little more forcefully as she pulled him down and changed their position so that she was pinning him to the bed. It was outstandingly hard to keep himself from going along with the princess, taking a tremendous amount of restraint as she rested her forehead against his in confusion. What? She whispered breathlessly. We can't do this, he said seriously, gently lifting her off of him. What? We can't do this, not now anyways. Her eyes filled with confusion. Why? I need you to be honest with me, she nodded, taking his hands. Do you want me to stop this wedding? Of course. She exclaimed quietly. Listen, right now I've only got one way of stopping this. And that's by murder. He saw the flicker of surprise enter her eyes. It's the only idea I've got right now, but doing anything to try and stop this wedding will be treason. She nodded silently, her eyes watching his calm brown. They will not let us be together. If I'm caught, I'll be branded a traitor to the region. Then I'll go with you, Hoenn dash. But if I can find any way to stop this wedding without consequences, I want to do it. But I don't want you to be involved. Why? In case I fail, if your father or King Alexander get word that you've been involved with this, then I won't be able to help you. I don't want you hurt, she said sternly. He grinned slightly, kissing her on the cheek. But as your guardian, I'm entitled to a few injuries here and there. She opened her mouth to protest, but he cut her off by kissing her lightly. And seeing as how you're my princess, I'd fight till the death to make sure you're safe. I don't want you fighting to the death for me, she said, gripping his collar and kissing him hard on the lips. His arms found their way around her waist. Love makes you do stupid things. She tried to pull him down onto the bed, but once again he resisted. I have to get going. Her eyebrows furrowed. It's not even midnight. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. Her eyes opened in shock. What? She whispered. I've been given my final assessment. I'll be gone for at least a month, maybe even longer. What do you have to do? He looked away from her and to the ground. Ash. Remember how those two guardians went after that creature, and one of them died while the other was heavily injured? She nodded worriedly, sensing where this was going. I've got to take a stab at it. Ash, you can't, she said pleadingly, that's too dangerous. How can you kill something that killed Dash? I don't know, May, taking it out from a distance is my only thought at the moment. Please don't. I have to. I won't be able to contact you until I return. I'll send messenger pidgeys up to drop off letters, and I'll attempt to visit if possible. Ash got up off the bed and cupped the brunette's cheek gently. I want you to rest, don't stress yourself with everything that's going on, all right? She nodded with tears stinging the corner of her eyes. Spend time with Dawn, and if LaRousse tries anything, kick his butt, okay? She smiled slightly as she followed him to the window. Come home safe, that's all I ask. She stood on her toes and placed a feather-light kiss on his lips. I'll miss you. He smiled at her and kissed her on top of the head. I'll miss you too, take care. May snapped around as the door suddenly opened and in walked a frantic Dawn. May, I was just told that you're not allowed to see Ash anymore. She snapped. He gazed back to where Ash stood and blinked as he suddenly vanished. She drew back the drape and looked out the window into the courtyard below. Nearing the drawbridge was a rider in blue on a Ponyta who galloped across the bridge and out of sight. May, did you hear me? May turned back to her maid, blinking uncertainly. Yeah. I heard you. XXXXXXXXXX. The two riders trotted slowly towards Petalburg River, the sun beginning to peek out from the horizon. The riders reined in and turned to face each other. You have all your supplies? The apprentice Aura Guardian nodded. Yes, I do. Map? Yes. Compass? Another nod, Pika dash. Pikachu crawled out of his makeshift bed in the saddlebag and nodded. We're all set, Ally, Ash said softly. The blonde guardian gave him a shaky smile. I want you home in shape, do you understand me? Understood. And don't do anything stupid. Ash rose an eyebrow at her, making her laugh quietly. That's asking a bit too much, isn't it? Just a bit, he grinned. There was a brief silence between the mentor and apprentice until she leaned across the saddle and took him into a hug. You be safe, Ash, remember everything you've been taught and you'll be fine. I'll be safe, Ally, I've got Pi with me after all. Pi, Pikachu. Alyssa grinned before giving the soon-to-be guardian a peck on the cheek. Come home safe, you don't want to keep your princess waiting, she teased, making him blush. I will, Ally, take care. He gave her a grin as she released him from the hug. Raining blaze around to face north, he tapped his toe into his side and started off in a trot away from Petalburg. Alyssa remained where she sat atop Flare as Ash raised a hand in farewell, and then long after he was out of view. As much as she hated it, he was growing up.